Test, 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 test,
Cool. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. It is 5:10 and it is Tuesday, July 23rd. Welcome back. Second half of our budget review process prior to our meeting next week. The intention is to ensure that the personnel expenses as well as other miscellaneous expenses are discussed this evening, and we can go prepare for our meeting next week with City Council. Commissioner Braun, just a question. Last week there, it was still in the realm of the unknown. We have negotiated a contract with LSL.
Yes, that contract, I think staff negotiated the agreement with LSL, and that agreement was approved by council last week.
Perfect. So many of the conversations last week were operating under the assumption that LSL will be in here to backfill some of the work that we're doing, and that any adjustments that are fatal flaws, or hopefully not fatal. Josh, I'm starting to sound like you. And any problems we have will be discussed, discovered, and eradicated at mid-year. Okay. So thank you, Jen. Thank you, Jen. Appreciate that. Esteban, could you please do roll call for us?
Yes, sir. Chair Giuliani,
Here.
Vice Chair Rossi,
Present.
Commissioner Quaid,
Here.
Commissioner Ho.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Are there any public comments?
We have one general public comment in person, and so far no hands are raised.
Perfect. Let's call it. Let's have that public comment.
Sure, Mr. Betta.
The fatality of fate. I learned something a while ago from someone I respect in the community. It's a term called toxic positivity. And that explains a lot of the culture that we inhabit today, where Michael Cacciati on one hand could talk about the best programs in the world, and yet we've seen the complete disintegration of our financial management function. It's been progressive. You've taken a commission, Mr. Chair, and made a change in that in these chambers when you sit in it. And you have my fidelity. The facts, though, need to be back on record. We need to remind ourselves, lest we become too positive. In December, our finance director took the accounting operation hostage, having forced out Ms. Sue Lee. For the last 5 months, there has been no bank reconciliation. He has no one checking what he's doing. He's leaving on that basis. This budget has been taken hostage. There's been no change from what I can see, from what the commission had asked for. The behavior, the projection of physical violence from the podium several times. This commission has witnessed it. Leaving behind a scorched earth. Mr. Penman won't put up with this for a millisecond, John. And my fear is, for all of us, that a 60-day continuation of appropriations will be wasted because of the resistance of one individual. We're going to get to the point where someone says, well, let's just let the council adopt this. And they're going to. They have no alternative in their minds. And here we are, for the second year, we'll be in a place where there are a lot of promises about changing things. I know you'll do as much as you can to push that forward, but as much as we can to do that hasn't been enough for several years. Our finance director has been driving in a state of road rage since he arrived here. Nothing has been left unchallenged or fought over. And now I understand, John, the coup d'etat in Linwood and your difficulty of achieving any permanent employment. I've known you a long time. God bless you, buddy.
Are there any other public comments? Esteban?
No, no other public comments in person and no hands are raised.
Thank you very much. John, I want to compliment you. I see the packet that you gave out this evening, and you have at the last page of that packet, you've attempted to summarize the changes we talked about, some of the changes we talked about last week.
Yes.
And I'm going to check an assumption. You and I have communicated about this, so I want to make it a matter of public record.
Absolutely.
The changes that we've discussed last week and that we will be discussing this week will be reflected in the conversations next week when we present the budget to the city council. Am I correct?
That is correct. So basically, we're going to be presenting the budget. We will have some changes. So everyone's been given a punch list of some of the changes in there. There may be one or two more in there, but we will have that all spelled out. And so basically, the approach is from this document here is the punch list of changes that have occurred that will be presented on the 31st. So it's very clear what they are, where they're located. So it's easy traceability to go right to it and say, okay, what is that? And I can see it. So that's the approach that's going to be with respect to the punch list. And then with respect to the Finance Commission, comments and everything. So that will also be relayed to the City Council as well when we present the final budget, proposed budget for the 24-25 fiscal year.
Any questions, comments? Yeah.
John, may I ask a favor on this,
Mhm.
on this punch list? Will
Yes.
you note that whether or not it's an expense or revenue account rather than just, putting that on
Sure.
the
Yeah,
account?
absolutely.
I was
Yeah.
trying to figure out what the bottom line total of the changes was going to be and to try to figure out if it's revenue or expense. And it was just going back through the accounts. It was time consuming and difficult to do.
Good recommendation. And thank you, John, for your openness to that. Any other?
Yeah, the short answer, absolutely.
Thank you.
Other-
Absolutely.
I think there were also some changes that we've suggested prior to, including things within the budget document. So for instance, the narrative, to make sure that the narratives are right, and also what we're going to be looking at as a management report. And I don't think we've seen either of those.
So those will be listed as the comments from the Finance Commission to the council.
So I guess
So
I
it
mean,
will be-
they're listed as comments. However, they're
Yes,
supposed to be part of the budget. So are we going to see them?
you will not see them in the document unless the City Council gives us direction to do so.
They're supposed to be in the document from the first place. No, I'm sorry, for a second, let's stop for a moment. The narrative are supposed to be in the documents in the first place. We're supposed to have them, and most of the departments do have narratives. Your department, Finance Department, was the one where I spoke to you about having a better narrative because it wasn't clear what was going on in there. The management report is a standard part of the budget document. There is no management report. We haven't received that management report. So that's kind of the narrative discussion. Is there one?
So I'm not certain what you're referring to when you're saying the management report. I'm not quite certain. what which-
The narrative that
document.
comes in from at the beginning of here's our budget, here are the things that have happened this year, here's what we're
The
projecting.
budget message is what you're
Correct.
referring to. Okay.
Yes.
So with the budget message will be in the final budget document. So in other words, the published document will have the budget message in there. In terms of what's being presented next week, the budget message will not be in that document. It will be basically very similar to the document you have now. So it's an apples and apples comparison on there. For the publication, we will have a budget message in there.
So it's been almost a month and there's been almost no changes. And none of the work that was supposed to be done to get the budget towards completion and the stuff that was presented to us, it wasn't where it needed to be for us to go ahead and pass the budget. Now you're saying that that report will be as part of the final published and we'll never have had a chance to review it or see anything that's part of that.
So the budget message is generally something that staff puts together and then they go over it with the city managers because it's really the city manager's budget message. So at the end of the day, Once we put this together, we will seek their input, and that will be part of the published
So
document.
then what is the rest of the timeline then for the budget? I mean, I'd like to know just for my own sake of
Sure.
what's the expectation is.
So depending on what the council decides next Wednesday on the 31st. So say, for example, if they approve and adopt the budget at that point, we will, and if there, usually there's always a last minute change that the council weighs in, that they want different things at that, particular moment. We will incorporate whatever changes that are requested of us at that point. And at that point, we will do several things. So we will have final numbers. We will be incorporating that into our financial system. We will be incorporating that throughout the financial document itself. We will be incorporating the budget message. Everything that you typically see in the budget document will be flowing in there, obviously updated for the current 24-25
So,
fiscal year.
but then what's the plan for next week? What is it that we're doing? What are we?
So the plan
reviewing?
next week is, so we have the June 27th
Mhm.
document here. And so as I brought up before, the point was to break down the budget document, to the revenues, expenditures, the CIP, and personnel. And so so we're going through that process right now. And then we will also, again, because we received direction for these certain punch list things, and so we're going to include those into that final document. We're going to list them out. We're then going to we're going to present that full document to the city council on the 31st. And then we're going to, at that point, there'll be discussions by the city council on the document. And they're going to weigh in whether they're going to adopt it or whether they're not going to adopt it at that point. So if they adopt it at that
Wait, I'm
point,
sorry. So you're going to present to them the punch list items that have not been incorporated?
no,
And then
no,
ask them, so what are you asking them to adopt?
excuse me, one second.
Yeah, I don't. There's been quite a bit of misrepresentation of what the commission has recommended in the past. And so I'd like to make sure that we see what the recommendations are or the interpretations of our recommendations before they go to council.
And we can do that. So again, so back to the original question about if the city council adopts a budget next week, then from there, we will finalize the document for publication in its entire package.
So
That's what we will do.
So the city council would possibly adopt the budget next week prior to incorporation of any of the pieces that we put in. So they would, that's what you're saying.
No, I'm not saying that. So what I'm saying, we're presenting a budget document next week. It will incorporate all the punch list items that everyone here has seen since the 27th on there.
But it'll incorporate it as a punch list of potentially incorporating.
No, they will be incorporated into the document and we will spell them out. Here's what's changed in this document from the 27th to the 31st.
John,
That's not what it's.
will we see
that's not
this
necessary.
new budget document before it's presented to council?
That will be presented to both of you at that time. Everyone here has received a copy of the punch list, so everybody has a list of the punch list. Those things will be incorporated into the document.
John, I'm sorry.
Uh-huh.
Is the 31st, is that a joint meeting of the
Yeah.
Finance
is.
Commission? Okay, so the commission will see the new document. There'll be a new budget document produced.
Correct.
It will be the June 27th budget, plus you are going to incorporate the things you're describing here
Correct.
into a new budget document.
That is correct.
That will be distributed to the commission and the city council with the agenda packet,
Correct.
which I assume we'll get on Monday.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. But to Commissioner Rossi's point, the summary document that she was requesting, the management report or the management letter, that will not be available because.
It's a budget message. It's not a management letter.
Thank you. That's better said. That will not be available on Wednesday. Am I correct?
That is correct. That will be included in the completed published document. That's the only time that I put that document in there.
That's part of the entire budget that they're approving. So I mean, you're asking the city council to approve a document without having seen the entirety of the document and adding narratives at the end.
No. So in order to move this meeting along, it's been noted, and we are concerned, and I am concerned also that what is the phrase, the terminology you're using with that?
It's the budget message
The budget message
Mhm.
from
from the city manager's
managers.
office.
In
Mhm.
this case, it would be the interim city managers.
Yes.
Okay. So Sheila, you have some homework to do. We're giving it to you already. Okay.
That's Brian.
And Brian's not here, so it's on you. So there's some homework that needs to be done. It would be helpful if we had at least the draft of that to look at on the 31st, before the 31st.
You will not have it on the
So
31st.
I'm actually curious, like who typically, who prepared that message last year? Was that the city manager's office?
Yes. Mhm.
So the city manager prepared the,
Yeah, so it's a multitude of people that put into the document, and then the city manager goes through it.
so who are the
and then
multitude of
does it.
people who put in the document?
I'm sorry,
So,
Yeah.
I mean, were you one of the multitude of people who put in?
oh, yes, absolutely, yes.
The department heads, is that predominantly who we're talking about?
Some of the department heads, definitely the finance director, but it's predominantly the city manager's office.
So again, in an effort to move this meeting along,
Mhm.
it should be noted by you and everyone else that that is a concern. Okay, and we'll be expressing that concern, Janet, to the city council when we meet with them. Is there anything else, Commissioner Rossi? Was that the point you were trying to make?
I mean, the point I was trying to make is that it's supposed to be part of the budget document.
Yes.
The
Heard.
finance department is part of developing it. I'm
Yeah.
not really understanding I'm not really understanding where a lot of the resistance to making anything changes has been. It's been almost a month. The last meeting and this meeting, we've seen almost nothing changed, and very little work. And so I feel like this has been a strange process, and I'm a little bit resentful at this point, quite honestly, that we're here at the end of July, and I don't really see much difference than where we were at the end of June.
Noted. Any other comments from the commissioners? Janet, please.
Just because we're on the punch list,
Mhm.
John, I don't know whether you were going to put in sort of the agreement with our prior city manager in the budget.
In terms of, so normally with that's really incorporated in the overall operating budget of the internal service funds. So in other words, we anticipate, so much cost for the year. So that's one of the activities that will flow into that. We wouldn't carve that out specially, if you would.
Okay.
So in other words, we're expecting to have so much cost for, workers' comp, general liability, and then also insurance payments, to Prism and so forth, and third administrator party costs. So those numbers are already baked in. So this would be something, lack of a better way of putting it, almost like a subset within that. So
Okay.
for example, if I budget, matter of fact, here, let me go to
Well,
this.
I'm just saying that, a $307,000 check was written
Yes,
in budget year 2025.
correct.
So I just want to make sure that that's in the budget somewhere.
Yes, and so that's really part of what we expect for normal activity within the insurance fund.
So you're going to put that in the insurance fund?
We've already baked in those types of costs within the insurance.
That's not an insurance fund expense.
That's a personnel expense. isn't
It,
John?
it is an insurance fund expense, yes.
It is.
It's not an insurance fund expense. Is it being paid out by Prism? I don't
This is,
believe, I
no,
don't
this
believe
is
that
an insurance, this is the insurance fund. The insurance
I
fund
understand what
Right.
the insurance fund
handles
is.
workers' comp, general liability,
Right.
other legal costs, certain types of legal costs related to HR and risk management, and along with the insurance premiums. And then what we expect to recover from our insurance carriers, in addition to what we expect the other departments to
The
recover.
the insurance fund includes our insurance premiums and it includes general liability and workers' compensation. I've never seen a line item in our insurance once say other legal related to employment issues. It's been very specific that it's workers' compensation.
So again, this will flow into the insurance fund and this will be included in that cost.
Okay, so John, be prepared for us to call that out when we are at city council next week.
There-
Sure.
Thank you.
So again, but this is normal. This is the normal accounting of an internal service fund, specifically an insurance fund. So this is just a normal activity.
It's
We
not
have
normal, John.
settlements and this is.
John,
what
it's
we
not
handle.
normal. It is not normal.
Uh,
And I have a problem with saying that it's normal because we've actually looked back at several years of insurance information and I have not once seen that put in on any sort of severance package information placed into the insurance fund. So it's not normal. I don't understand in what
It is a correct
terms.
accounting of it.
Yeah, okay, I think that was just a number I was looking for.
Yes.
Quite honestly, I just
And,
wanted to raise it.
and
so-
if you're looking for, Commissioner Braun, I'm sure the, 25,000 residents of South Pasadena are looking for it too. It was on the front page of the South Pasadena Review. Yes. Okay, got it. Okay. Well, who thought this was going to be a short meeting? Let's
Mhm.
go, John. Okay.
Well, thank you, Finance Chair and Vice Chair, and good evening, everyone. So we're going to kick off tonight with the agenda. It's to go over personnel costs, the specifically the personnel costs, position controls. We're then going to talk about expenditures. And so we have the department heads here ready to talk about all of their departments and their programs in there. And so we're going to flow through from the personnel section to department expenditures. We're going to reference the document that everyone has here. So as we're going through it, we're going to reference, please see page number X in there as we go through the process with that. At the end of that, we'll take questions, of course, and any comments or notes that the commission wants us to record and note and forward on to the city council for the 31st. So that's going to be the overall process. With that said, I'm going to introduce Tina. She had to step in for Lewis. Lewis unfortunately became ill and was not able to attend tonight's meeting. So with that, I would like to introduce Tina.
Welcome, Tina. And we're normally nice to you the first time you speak to us. Okay. So I promise you, I'll control this group up here.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Good
Of
evening,
course.
commissioners. So we are going to discuss, this conversation is going to discuss some of positions that were prorated for fiscal year 2025, 2024, 2025. How many positions were not funded, historical staffing numbers, and historical vacancy rates. So for this upcoming budget,
Tina, for purposes of following along,
Yes.
can you tell us where we are in these various sheets and
sure.
documents?
So with regards to the prorated documents, I don't have that sheet, but for the historical staffing numbers and the historical vacancy rates were the sheets that we provided
hand it out.
prior to. Yes.
Perfect.
So for this upcoming fiscal year, we have prorated 24 full-time positions. Out of those 24 full-time positions, there are 2 actually that are not going to be funded for this fiscal year. With the historical vacancy report, if you take a look at that report, we have it for 2019, 2024. This last fiscal year, 23, 24, we had a vacancy rate of 14%. That's 24 full-time positions. Previous to that, it was 23 and 14 before that, 10 and 11. So in 2019, we had 11 vacant full-time positions, which equates to 7%. If you look at the second sheet for fiscal year 2024, 2025, the current vacancy rate is 16%. We have 27 full-time vacant positions at this time.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, of course.
What was the number of prorated positions full-time only for last year?
For 23, 24,
Correct.
we did not have any prorated positions.
Yes, you had $1.67 million of prorated positions. So I wanted to find out what was the number of prorated
So they-
positions.
They were prorated based on the fact that we weren't able to fill those positions, but they weren't necessarily prorated at budget time.
No, they were prorated at the budget time. There was 1.67 million.
Okay, well,
So
I'll
you,
look
you
at- I'll
might,
look
you
into
might not
that.
know, but it was confirmed by, at the last meeting that there was $1.67 million of, positions, salary expenses that were omitted from the budget. They were prorated.
Okay,
Not
I
because,
will look
not
into
because,
that.
not because they weren't filled, but that's because they weren't going to be.
Vice Chair, that is correct. So we did have prorated positions, and the savings on that for last year was about $1,067,000 from the general fund.
So my question is, how many of those positions were prorated? So we
Off the
just-
top of my head, I can't answer that. I'm happy to go back and get that information.
And so the 24 positions that I'm discussing today is the positions that are being prorated as of July 1st. Obviously, towards the end of the fiscal year, you may have other positions, depending on our vacancies, that are going to continue to be prorated, or some people resigning and whatnot. So therefore, we will have more prorated positions at that time.
I understand, Tina. I think,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that you don't have all the information. The positions that I'm talking about were prorated as of July 1st of last year.
Okay.
So that's what I'm requesting. So I guess the question that I would have then is, of these 24 positions that are currently prorated, and this might be a question for Mr. Downs, which is what's the price on that? What's the dollar figure?
So
ju-
Vice-
John, just for clarity's sake.
Yes.
And I believe I'm trying to understand Commissioner Rossi's question. We're going into the 24-25 fiscal year with 24 prorated positions. Is that a
Mhm.
correct statement?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so, and what I hear Commissioner Rossi's question to be is, what is the dollar amount associated with those 24 positions?
Meaning the annual cost for that position.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, similar to the 1.67 million from last year, what would
Yes.
that be for this year?
Right.
What
Okay.
is it, what have you omitted in the budget related to those 24 positions?
Sure.
What is the budgetary savings, whatever terminology you want to use?
Yes. Okay, noted.
Do you know what it is?
Off the top of my head, no.
Perfect. Okay,
So wait, I don't understand how that is, because we're talking, this is the financial side of it. So how do you not know what it is as far as what's not in the budget, what's the proration? Because I thought that was the part that
Mhm.
you actually took care of.
No, so with the respect to the budget, with all the dollar amounts, personnel, so we've costed everything out and we've done so. Some of the positions are prorated based on management services and city managers as they went through and determined when these positions were going to be filled. So those are baked into the budget. I haven't calculated what's the delta between if you fully fund these versus as they are prorated. I have not done that. And so I could not answer that off the top of my head. That would be a
So-
calculated.
make a note that that's something I think we're all going to find interesting.
Well,
Sure, and I can include that for the 31st.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
and I'm confused because last year when we talked about this, you said that you had a very complex system that you went through and were very detailed about how you came up to the 1.67. Well, you didn't say the 1.67 million, but for the proration.
Yes.
And I'm trying to, and now I'm hearing that it's management services, Mr. Frosto, and the city manager's office. And that's not really something that you've worked on.
So let me clarify that. So in terms of, so I do have a very complex personnel costing model on there. What I receive from management services and city manager's office is they work with the departments and for all these vacant positions, and they determine when these positions are going to be filled. The way the model works is everything's broken down into a monthly increment. So 12 months is 100%. So you can have anything from 12 months down to 0 on there. So there are certain positions, these vacant positions where they've been prorated based on their conversations with the departments. And so those prorations are baked into the costing on it. So instead of a position being, 12 months, for example, in the prior year, we knew the chief of police that we wouldn't fill that position until January. And so therefore, it was prorated for 6 months of the 12 in there for its total costing. So we have that kind of approach. And so we've gone through extensively with this on those vacant positions, and we've done that, and that's what's incorporated into the overall
I guess
document.
my question really is, who is ultimately the person who is responsible for those numbers and accountable for that? Is that your department or is that management services?
So the costing of it is my department.
All right, so my question was, what was the costing for the 24 positions, prorated positions?
And so again, I have to go back and look at the model to determine that, it's embedded in the overall cost of personnel. So I'd have to extract those out and then prorate and then say, okay, what does it look like for these positions to be 12 months versus whatever they are?
I guess,
And look at the delta.
I mean, this question has been brought up repeatedly over the last couple of months, and we haven't received an answer. And I don't understand how this even goes to the council next week, or why we would even have a meeting. If we just, this is the basic question. This is the 70% of the expenditures question that we've been trying to ask and get answered for several months now. So I don't understand why we don't have that number. And that's
Well,
what I'm struggling with.
Sure. So again, this is the process. Again, the Finance Commission is to provide high-level oversight. It's not to really get in the weeds and let's look at this, let's look at the spreadsheet
High level. I
and are you
appreciate that,
doing
but
the
this is 70,
spreadsheet?
this is
So
70,
that's
this
what
is
it's not
70%,
supposed to
this is
do.
the 70% of the budget. I've been asking about this information from 70% of the budget, which is high level, for months, right? That's basic
The
information.
high level is within this document.
John, you know what? I think I'm going to step away from this meeting. Because what I'm finding is this is incredibly unproductive. And it doesn't, all of this is doing is back and forth. It's been happening for months. And I'm having a major issue with this meeting. We arrived here with almost nothing changed. This document is not what we've been asking for.
There was never
It's-
going to be any change to this document. This document was going to be as it was as a 627. And that's what the document is. We're going to show that it was the purpose of these meetings were to go over the different components of the budget, the revenues, the personnel, the departmental.
Correct. Now, the
CIP.
question.
That was solely the purpose of these meetings.
No, that is actually not what the purpose of the meetings were. It was actually for us to be having working meetings and trying to figure out how we get to a budget that we can agree and feel comfortable on, not for it to be us to be educated or explained to. But even saying that that's what the purpose was, then the purpose would be to answer the questions that we've been asking for several months. And one of the questions, and it's a critical question, is what's the prorated number? And that is critical. And you know, one of the reasons I could tell is critical, when you look back at our 5-year forecasts that we had from 2 different consultants, they both made sure to mention the prorated number because that's something that needs to be done. So I
The 5-year
appreciate-
forecast will never use they use vacancy factors. They're not sophisticated enough to do
2
that.
different consultants did.
They both will tell you that.
John, well, then I'd like to have them tell me in person. They didn't. So 2 different consultants put it in paper. And I think this is a part of the problem. I mean, these meetings have gotten to a point where no matter what we ask, no matter what we recommend, you just said that we needed to have purview. There's no purpose to having this meeting. We're basically you were going to be educating us, which I've heard quite a bit over time. We're supposed to be you're telling me the kind of advice that we're supposed to be giving and how we're supposed to be looking at the document. The different changes that we've requested haven't been added in. They haven't, and I'm talking basic changes, just the narrative, even for your finance department, that's supposed to be there, weren't added in. And so I'm getting to a point of frustration because this is quite honestly not acceptable because this has been a game. We were supposed to come and work through and figure out how we get to a place that we're comfortable. And now I think it's my understanding, and this is, the department heads are here and whatnot, but I understand that they're not really responsible for what happens with the personnel, that's actually managed through management services. And it's not,
Well,
they're not part of that portion.
the
budget.
departments, of course, they're weighing in on their personnel. They're looking at all their positions, when they think their positions are going to be filled. If they're vacant positions, they're looking at their positions, how they're going to allocate among their departments and their divisions and their funding sources and what they're going to do. So they're very integral with it from that standpoint. When it comes to the costing out of those positions, that falls to the finance department.
John, this has been I would say interesting was the adjective I was going to use. It's not interesting. It's distressing, to be honest with you, this back and forth I'm hearing between you and Commissioner Rossi. You said one thing that really, well, it's the first time I've heard it said or articulated, and that these working sessions last week and this week were not intended to change the 627 document. My assumption coming into both of these working sessions is that we would not only review, but we would change it, and we would take a better budget to the city council.
No, the Finance Commission can make recommendations. The city council authorizes the budget. You can make recommendations. We note those recommendations. They present it to the city council, and the city council will make the final decisions on what they want to do.
So I'm just gonna, oh, go ahead.
No. So, John, let me play back how I just digested what you said. The Finance Commission takes the budget that you've prepared and you've presented, and we make comment on it. We review it, make comment on it, ask for clarification. But in your view, the Finance Commission has no purview on driving the content of that document.
So no, it's much more nuanced than that. So what I'm saying is that, so the Finance Commission weighs in, they can make comments on anything within the budget.
Right.
On there, and they forward those comments on to the city council, because the city council is ultimately responsible for approving or not approving the budget.
I understand that. Okay, so I interrupted Commissioner Braun, please.
So John, I guess there's a level of frustration that's happening, I think, throughout the room. And I don't mean just up here. I think it's everybody. I think in this instance, the council did not approve the 627 budget. So I think by definition, they were looking for, again, I'm only one of five, but I think, as I recall, it was sort of work with the Finance Commission and let's try to get a budget in the next 60 days. So I do think that my sense from that action was that the council was looking for perhaps some changes if it was felt that those were necessary. I think some of the concerns that were raised at that meeting. So whether the process is that changes are made before it finally gets to council on the 31st, or whether there's just going to be this big punch list of items, I don't know. But if there's, maybe the answer is we just put a big punch list together. I think now we're talking about process.
That is correct.
But I think the challenge is, look, this 70% of the expenditures for the general fund is personnel. And what we've been asking for several months has been this information, this number, in multitude of ways. It's been since at least February, March. And this meeting was supposed to provide additional detail. It's not providing the additional detail. That's where, this information on what was prorated should have actually been brought forth from the very beginning. And it should have been included as part of the budget documentation from the very beginning.
So, Tina, we understand that you may not have this information.
I do not.
So we're not asking you for this information.
Okay.
Would you please, though, make a note?
Yes.
Lewis should have or should be able to give us that particular piece of information. Without that, we're going to have difficulty. I'm going to speak for Pete. I will have difficulty sitting in front of the city council on the 31st of July and saying, I recommend, or I feel comfortable that the city council approve the budget. Okay. So I'm just Lewis needs to know that. And again, I'm not holding you accountable for not having that information. I do believe, though, to your point, Commissioner Rossi, Commissioner Braun, we have the best we can do right now, because my assumption was your assumption, and that was on the 27th of June, the budget was rejected. My assumption was that these working sessions last week and this week would be included in a revised document. John was working under a different set of assumptions. I'm glad it finally came out. Best we can do is create a punch list, and the we all need to bring our pajamas and cots on the evening of the 31st, that it is going to be an extraordinarily long evening if we're going to ask the city council to either reject or accept each line item that we're discussing right now. Okay, so thank you for that's probably the best possible solution we have.
Yeah, I am going to say one other thing about if you'll allow me
Oh, please.
on these numbers. And I've raised this in several meetings. I don't remember if they were commission or council meetings. And Tina, this is something I know I've talked to Lewis about, this concept of budgeted and authorized, right?
Yes.
So I see that in 2024, this legal size paper
Yes.
says that the budgeted full-time positions was 173. I think that's wrong. As I remember, that was the authorized number of positions because
That is correct.
right. So I think this information might be incorrect. And I see it on then this little one for 2025. Again, it says the same thing, budgeted full-time positions. I'm wondering whether that's really authorized. So, and then sort of just generally speaking, and this is much more of a policy decision for the city manager, you know, we have added quite a number of what is reflected on these as budgeted full-time positions. I mean, that's really gone up. So I know that we'd like to say, oh, we have a terrible vacancy rate. Well, we've added 12 to 20% more people. So I think that's a real question. Now hopefully we'll have an interim city manager coming in on Monday. To me, that's one of the biggest questions, as Commissioner Rossi points out. Benefits and wages and benefits are 70% of our budget. So I think we really need to get a handle on what's the right number of people. And then also this whole concept, once again, I think is coming up. I think we've got the wrong number here. I think 173 was the authorized, not the budgeted, which gets to your point, Sheila, about proration.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's proration, but if you actually look at it, even looking at this current one, and let's use 171 as the number. If you take out 24 positions, you say it's 24 are prorated. And to some extent, when I hear to some extent, it means one day to a year. And I've heard that term used to some extent. It gives me really horrible flashbacks to the 2020 budget discussions. When you take that out, you're left with 147 positions, 147 fully funded, 100% FTEs. So one of the things that I am struggling with is what I see as a bit of a game that's been being played on what's happening with our actual positions. We have 147 fully funded positions. So that's it. We can't do this prorated stuff has created so much fog. And that means if you look at the number of full-time positions in the past, so those I assume were full FTEs. So that means that we have gone up 7 positions. Last year, I guess it was up to 9 positions and now it's dropped down 2. But those are the real numbers we're discussing. So I'd like to know what are the real numbers that we really want added on, because it's also clouding our expenditures. It's what made it look like we had a deficit this last year, right? Because I'm actually confused because there's 1.67 million. So if those positions weren't filled and they were prorated not to be included, then how is it that those expenditures were lower for personnel?
No, so let me clarify a couple things here. So number one, when we're talking about the positions, so we had basically we prorated last year and we had about $1,067,000, whatever, and that's etched in my brain, of savings from the general fund from those prorations.
Well, they weren't savings. They were never part of the budget.
Sure. If you want to classify it that way, sure. But in terms of what was driving the deficit, in terms of from a budget standpoint, that was solely driven from the discretionary projects that were within the transfers of 2.3 million. So we had 2.3 million of transfers. Of that 2.3, 700,000 of it was to support the lighting and landscaping district. The
No,
rest of it was discretionary projects.
then how did we end up going from a deficit to a surplus? Because the lighting and landscaping still happened. The majority of the discretionary projects still happened. There was only like what, 1.3 million or something of it that didn't happen. Now it's in this year's budget. So the question is, how did we have a $5 million swing?
Sure. And so the bulk of the $5 million swing, 3.5 of it was from vacancies, from vacancies. The rest of it was from operations and maintenance, consulting. Specifically, one of the biggest areas of it had to do with the housing element. If you recall, we had almost $1.2 million budgeted in the housing element. We had hardly spent, I don't even think we spent 300,000 of that number. So you add that in with 3.5 vacancy, and then there's a bunch of other smaller things beyond that.
But
That's how you get to the
But I
5
think
million.
this is why the precision and language, which has been, for some reason, hard to do here, has been so important. Is the vacancies that you're talking about in addition to the prorated ones that were never budgeted in the first
Correct.
place?
Yeah.
So how many positions did we have vacant? And I have to say, I mean, I would highly recommend that this commission makes a recommendation to the council to get rid of this nonsense that's been happening on the prorated positions. It needs to go away completely because it's been too murky and cloudy, and we have not been able to get a single clear answer to have an understanding of our positions.
Commissioner Rossi, I agree. It is confusing. That is a very confusing.
Maybe I can explain a little bit. So,
Well, goodness gracious, I hope so, because Lewis couldn't.
so for example, we have 171 positions that we're saying that are going to be budgeted for fiscal year 24-25, correct? And we're telling you that we have 24 positions that are being prorated. I cannot remove,
Meaning they will not be filled.
they will not be
At
filled
least for one day. Or
Exactly.
as many as 12 months.
Exactly.
Got it.
So, well, we have estimated that only 2 positions will not be filled for 12 months, but the rest might be filled at month 6 and month 7. We don't know.
Hopeful.
So if we remove those 24 positions and we say we only have 147 budgeted positions, that means I can't hire the remaining positions because they are not budgeted for,
But
even though they're prorated. Now we can break it down for you and we can say, these are the positions that are fully funded. These are the positions, this is the number of positions that are prorated, but we do have 173 authorized positions. We did receive approval from council. We've done a lot of work on this to say that we do have 173 positions that were authorized. That does not necessarily mean that all those 173 positions were fully budgeted for or budgeted, or sorry,
Yeah,
that they
no.
were there working for the 12 months in the fiscal year.
Tina, just for a little clarification, you said fully budgeted for. That means for 12 months, fully loaded.
Yes,
Perfect. So,
Yes.
so there is some number of positions that you're projecting already that have been approved,
correct.
but 24 that have been approved, but that will not be filled for some period of time. And those positions, the way you account for those unfilled positions is you call them, what do you call it?
We just call them prorated positions.
Prorated positions. Okay. So, and John has projected using his formulaic approach, what those numbers would be for those prorated positions.
That is correct.
But he hasn't told us what
But,
it is.
well, we don't know what the approach is, but we're trusting that it exists. Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. So Tina,
Yes.
if the council told you tomorrow, if we don't want any more prorated positions, we would be stuck with 140 we have, with 147 we have. Perfect. Is that correct?
If you remove the proration, you'd have 173 authorized positions,
Okay, which would be fully funded.
full-time equivalent positions.
Fully loaded, fully funded
For
positions.
12 months.
Yes,
So we'd have 173,
correct.
all of them.
Well, so I've always used a proration because it's hyper accurate.
Yes.
So I've always used this across the board.
Right.
Other agencies have less sophisticated modeling, and so they budget the whole, they budget everything, and then they come up with an estimate. What do we
Okay.
think we're going to
John.
have in vacancy savings?
John.
Right.
And
Right.
so it's
Okay.
just, a number. It's just a percentage. There's nothing that substantiates it other than going back and looking at history and say, well, if we look at the history, we take that.
Okay, John,
approach.
let me ask you the question from a different direction. Since you didn't give me the prorated number that was excluded, what is the fully loaded? 100%, you have all of the,
All 173.
all 173 positions. What is that full price? What's the full cost of that?
So I can cost that out. I would have to go back to the model and
Well,
basically,
it should be in the budget now. I mean, that's what I don't understand. And this is the part that I don't understand.
sure,
That, again, is 70% of the budget.
Right.
So you can't tell me what the prorated amount is. You can't tell me what the fully costed is, but you say you have,
it's
you have it.
embedded in all these numbers. It's like, tell me what these 6 things are out of, 250 positions because we have, both full-time and we have part-time.
No, I only
So
want
it's-
full-time. I don't want to actually discuss part-time at all. It is so
But the point-
inconsequential.
But the point
I want
is,
and the way I've seen actually both, again, the consultants, they talked about full-time. I want to talk about only full-time.
yes,
Okay.
sure,
So I want complete clarity.
okay,
So the question is, we came in to talk about, have a conversation about expenses. The largest portion of the budget for the general fund
yes,
is salaries and wages, right?
Right.
It's personnel. So I'm asking the basic numbers of what is the fully loaded expense for that,
173.
for 173.
So John, and as a piggybacking on Commissioner Rossi's question, if we had the number
Mhm.
for the fully loaded
Mhm.
expenses associated with 173, and we took a look, we had that number,
Mhm.
and we took a look at your current budget number,
right.
the delta would be,
That would be
Yes.
the savings.
well, it's not savings, it's just the delta between.
Yeah, savings isn't the right, sure.
Okay,
That is the change in cost.
for your 24 positions that you want to hire for.
That-
eventually.
That are going to be prorated,
Prorated.
correct, that I want to
So
hire for.
The proration, so $1 million is 173 fully loaded. Your budget line says $750,000. That means we believe
Mhm.
there's $250,000 in proration going on.
Right. Yeah, that would be the basic,
Yes.
the
That-
basic
it-
premise, yeah.
So that's just basic arithmetic.
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't know what the true delta is. That was Commissioner Rossi's question.
Mhm.
Our second question is, we don't know what the true cost is if everything is fully loaded at full employment from July 1 forward.
Yes,
Okay, so you can understand, hopefully you can understand why we as simple minds up here are trying to, and I speak for myself, are trying to understand what this proration truly does to us, what it does to our budget.
And Chair, if I
Please, go
can,
for it.
and I think, John, you and I had a conversation about this several weeks ago. I think and from my perspective, and I'm not, finance is not my first job, but again, what it means is, what do we expect for the future,
Mhm.
right? Because the reason it's so important is because, let's say we're hiring them in February. Okay, so we've only, in this budget, 2025, we've only got whatever number of months that is, 5. But what we need to know is next year. Now we've hired them in February, so that person's going to be full-time next year. What is that cost going to look like? I think that's, from my perspective, that really is why it's so important, because we know that for the current year, it's going to be a prorated cost.
sure.
But then I think you and I had that conversation, but it would also be really helpful to know what the full blown cost is, because assuming your employees are going to stay for a very long time,
Yes,
you need to know what costs you're going to anticipate for the coming years.
sure. The only caveat there, and so we can absolutely do that. The only caveat I would kind of mention is, so when you do this, number one, you're always going to have a certain amount of vacancies. That's why, whether you're doing the proration or you're doing a vacancy factor, you always know you're going to have to some degree. That's number one. Number two, irrespective of that, every city I've ever been at, when I'm doing the budgets, there are always going to be positions that are not going to be budgeted for whatever the reasons that they are. there are always positions that are not going to be filled in a particular year for particular reasons.
So
Each
yeah,
city has its
so
own unique
we
reasons.
understand that's the difference between authorized and budgeted, but one of my issues that I've had is both the finance department and management services departments, the leads, I won't talk about the rest of the department, have continued to say, oh, they're all budgeted, or they're almost all budgeted to some extent. And so I understand saying we want to do this many authorized. The question is, what is it that we can afford to do to have in the budget? And yes, there are always vacancies, but right now we actually have, what I'm understanding is that there are vacancies on top of what was prorated. So that makes it hard to understand too and have clarity into what's really happening. I personally believe when I look at these vacancy report numbers, because of the way the authorizations have happened, it has been, the authorization numbers have been built up every single year. And then it makes it look like we have vacancies on positions that have never been filled, we've never had before. And you can say, look, we have an 18% vacancy, sorry, 16% vacancy rate. Do you really have a 16% vacancy rate?
So let me,
Is there positions or are they based on positions that you were never planning to fill that year anyway?
right,
And that's one
right.
thing, that's
And
one of
that's
the
a
problems.
distinguishment.
So
Yeah.
if you have authorized positions in here that are prorated
Yeah.
to some extent.
Yes.
And that might be,
Versus one that's zero.
yes. So, and
Yeah.
that to me is like disturbing that it's like, yes, I understand saying that we were going to have some savings, but we need to know what the bottom line is first. And then you add in this is the percentage of savings. This is what we think
Yeah.
we're going to save because of different calculations, not the other way around. If we're just not even going to talk about it, we're going to
Right.
pretend it's not there.
Let me ask the commission this question. If we take whatever, a brief pause, I'll bring my laptop down here and I'll pull up the personnel, the detailed personnel, so we can see all the positions and how they're prorated. Again, it's a lot of detail. That's why a lot of stuff I can't rattle off the top of my head. There's too much detail in there.
And
But I'm happy to pull it, to do that if the commission
sure, and
wants to see that.
I'll be cleaner about it. I just want the bottom line.
Sure.
I don't want to go through all the details. I just want what the bottom line numbers are, and that's it.
Okay.
And part of it is too, like, look, one of the things in here that we've talked about is trade-offs. And, I'm not really understanding how department heads are supposed to be able to make those trade-offs or even suggest those trade-offs when there's so little clarity that's happening here. So they say, okay, I'd like to have these two vacant positions. I really need this one more. We're having trouble paying, having trouble attracting this one. We might need to get it at a higher salary rate. Like that to me is the kind of way you're supposed to be using the numbers for strategic decision making.
Correct.
And that's not being allowed in this. It's not, and look, I think there was a position even in PD that has been wanting to be funded. I'm not sure if it got funded. And that was part of the conversations that we were supposed to have. It's more than just, the budget's more than just this theoretical paper, like the end of the year term report. It's actually supposed to be driving strategic decisions. And we haven't been able to have those conversations to help that process along. And that's.
Understood. We do go through those conversations. We absolutely do go through
But you're
those.
not going through those conversations with the city council. Okay, and that's also part of it too, is having those conversations that there are trade-offs.
Yeah,
So
and
if
in all
if-
fairness, it is an internal deliberation.
Yes,
on
but the
staff's
city,
part.
but the city council is also, those conversations are staying internal. But then part of the city council actually needs to be having some conversations back with you. Suppose they're the board.
Yes,
They're the ones who are supposed to be providing the directions, as you've pointed out. And so if they need to have the right information brought forward to them in a way that's clear and understandable and not, well, it's really complicated and we have all these complicated models, it should be very clear and precise so that they can say, do we want to spend money on this item or do we want to make sure that there's a position over here in this department that is critical and we feel like needs to get funded, or this is, and look, and we have one of the things in here is talking about negotiations. I'm not sure how they go into negotiations without having clarity on the numbers for staffing. I don't even understand how that happens. And it's not really fair to the staff. Sorry.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm okay with that.
That's okay. Commissioner Rossi, thank you so much. I appreciate your point of view. John, I appreciate your point of view. Don't agree with 100% with either of you, but let's continue moving forward. Well, do we want to see this?
I'd like to know.
Well, I think there's been a lot of conversation about this and it's best just to resolve it, right? So if we want to know a number and John can go run and get his laptop and figure that out, I think it resolves one outstanding item that I think Commissioner Rossi has been asking for.
Okay. John, why don't you go do that? And while you're doing that, Tina, I know you have some points you want to make with these documents you passed out to us. John, if you go ahead and get that laptop, then Tina, why don't you continue?
The last document is the fiscal year 29 to 25 budgeted total and funded positions and authorized. And for this fiscal year 24-25, it does include the 2 positions that we discussed that would not have any funding allotted to them. So we will have 171 budgeted positions, but we still do have 173 authorized positions for this fiscal year.
So, can you help me understand
Yeah, of
what
course.
is the criteria that takes a position from budgeted to from authorized to budgeted?
So you need a lot of money
there's
to
two
it.
I'm thinking about those 4 department heads who
Right.
lost their position.
Yeah, so we have 173 authorized positions, like I mentioned before.
Right.
At one point, council approved all these positions.
Yes.
When there's 2 positions that are not going to have funding, I wasn't in those conversations as to how they
Okay.
came about, or why they picked specifically those 2 positions, so I can't speak on that. But what I can say is that for the decisions were made not to provide funding to those 2 positions.
Okay.
What the factors are behind that, I am not 100%
Fair
sure.
enough. Fair enough.
So-
So some decision, some conversation was happening
Yes.
somewhere that said council was kind enough to give us 173 positions. We're only going to budget for 171.
Correct.
Perfect. Janet
So I just, again, I would get back to, and I think this gets to Commissioner Rossi's point about the narrative. I mean, I am an old SEC lawyer, so I like MD&A and disclosure and sort of all the various things that one has to put in an MD&A analysis, which I think is what you're looking for, which we all would love to have. Because I look at, we had 143 positions in 2021. So we're here 4 years later with 20% more positions.
Correct.
And we don't know why. And that's not for you, Tina. That is not on your job. It's really the city manager to explain why we needed 20% more. There might be a great reason, and also I think the answer to defer to Commissioner Rossi is like, were those 20 more police officers? Was it 20 more administrative staff? Was it 20 more public works people? I mean, that's, and this is not really directed to you. It's just, we need to understand what's being done and why. And I think that's what's been missing in the budget document is we just get a bunch of numbers without any explanation. And I think that's been going on for a couple of years.
And to help with that,
explanation that we understand.
right. And so we are putting together a comprehensive document that indicates what positions were approved when by council. I mean, but that requires, we're going back, pulling staff reports, pulling resolutions to make sure that we have a comprehensive document that outlines why were these positions added this fiscal year? Why were these positions, removed or reclassified? So we are working on that.
Yeah.
And we can provide that at a future meeting.
And Tina, I would say this, is that, and I know I talked to several of the department heads. I mean, the agreements about staffing levels, and again, the reason it's important is because it's the majority of our general fund budget. But it's also, I mean, what's critical is operationally, right? Like operationally, we know what we want to do. Do we have the personnel to do it? And that's really the question. Like, it's not that we're just trying to like slash, like few positions as possible. It's like, are the right people allocated to the right departments? If we really want to fix the streets, do we really need 13 G&A employees? Maybe we need 6 and we need to take 7 and allocate to public works. I think so I think the problem from my perspective is that those explanations haven't
Yes.
been provided with the budget, and that's just for your information only. It's like sort of an explanation of operationally, we need these positions, here's why, here's what's been, less about like when was it approved and where the resolution is, but more sort of operationally, why are we needing these staffing levels?
So Tina, do you understand the messaging that needs to go back to Lewis and really to the entire department, help us to understand how you're spending 70% of our annual budget?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
So if I can
Please.
throw my thoughts into the fire too, because what I'm hearing, I totally understand about the focus on the budget and the proration and the actual funding. But to me, the key driver seems to be the authorization, right? Because theoretically, the city council at some point said we are prepared to fully fund 173
Correct.
positions or whatever, so 173 positions. So I think there's kind of layers here. Like the first, if we want to talk about like, do we need all these people? It has to start with a review of authorized positions, right? And then it gets to the second piece, which is internally, management decided out of the 173 authorized, 2 they weren't going to fund. And that's a whole different question. Like, how did management come to that decision? And then the last layer is to get from the 171 to the funded amount, right, which included that proration. That to me seems to be driven more by assumptions because there's going to be vacancy, there's going to be timing. And so that's more really a test of like, is the assumptions made for the budget valid? And it seems like John has built a very zero-based budgeting process where he says, I'm going to actually determine based on input of the departments when someone's going to be hired, which specific month, right? So he's got that method, which is probably why he can't readily pull out that delta. But to me, whether you take a vacancy rate, which seems like a lot of cities do, to say, hey, just a generic rate, or whether you do a zero-based, here's where I specifically identify, those are more of testing of assumptions that every budget you can just look at and say, is that reasonable, right? And then figure out, is that going to be consistent year to year? Do we have risks there from a budget perspective from one year to the next? But I think that, I guess what I'm trying to say is we're really zeroing in on that budgeted amount, that proration, which to me is just more of an assumption risk. Do we feel like it's reasonable? What would that mean for our future budgets? But if we really want to go to resources and people, I think it has to be a more thorough review of authorized positions. What is it that the city really believes should be filling, right? Basically the personnel profile, right, of for the city. So yeah, I just wanted to weigh in with that.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
And I think, Commissioner Ho, like my question comes in is that in February, I'll use 22, 23, the last time that we have actuals for, we had 140 full-time positions as of June 30th. Currently, we have 144 full-time positions. The question is, where do we go into having 33 new authorized positions? And is that something that the council has committed to making 100%? Like, yes, we'll pay all of them, or is it with the other option that they've talked about as a menu? And so part of my thing is that they've used different terminology and language each time they've spoken about it. So if it's authorized, you can authorize positions in the budget without budgeting for it. But even on this page right here, they say that they only have 2 unfunded positions, but they haven't told us to what extent those other positions have been prorated, right? So that's why I've honed in on that is because the lack of clarity with the language and what seems a little bit like gamesmanship with the language for me, that it's been hard to say, just tell me if it's authorized positions. I understand we have authorized positions, but we're not going to be able to fully budget them. But that's not the way they're speaking about it. They're saying everything is to some extent, it could be one day a budget. And I'm not sure if that's an acceptable approach to say we're okay with it being one day. And we've never seen any documentation along those lines. And that's, again, it's 33. Okay, if the city council is both authorizing and saying, yes, we'll commit to funding all of it, are we really looking at 33, adding 33 to new positions in? Is that?
Well, and that's why I think it's a thorough review of the
Yeah.
authorized, because that means at some point the city says, yes, go ahead and hire this 173. And the only reason we have prorations is because we have trouble hiring in. I mean, that's what I'm hearing is if we could hire everybody we needed to, policemen, firemen, whatever, it would be 171 positions, right?
Yes,
But-
but like historically, we have never even had close to 173 positions. So it is growing. So we say, oh, it's because we're having trouble hiring it in, but it is actually significantly growing the force. And it's making it unclear to really, for me, it's hard to then have a focus on where are the priority points that we need to address. So having this like giant menu, and zero-based budgeting, I think, has some different approaches to it, but having this giant menu, you say, okay, we just keep adding positions versus you need to get these positions filled. What do we need to do to get these filled? And we're not able to have those kind of strategic operational discussions in this
I
model.
totally
Yeah.
agree. I guess my perspective would be if we wanted to really look at that
Yeah.
and say, hey, are these positions making sense?
Correct.
It does go back to, and I know that the terminology hasn't been consistent, but what the city council actually authorized. So
Right.
if it jumped, part of it is because over the years, the city council has says, yes, please go ahead and add this
Right.
headcount, right? So it needs to go back to that to say,
Right.
who is it the city council agrees, right, should be, on payroll providing services. And if you go back to the authorized and says, well, out of the 171, guess what? We really don't think it should be 171. It's down to 140, right? The real
Right.
number. Your budget then can reflect that. I mean, we're kind of jumping right at the budget level, but I think that beyond that, there's like, does it make sense that there should have been 171 authorized positions to
Correct.
begin with, right?
Correct.
So
And I'll give you a little bit of background from what happened last year during the budget season. So when we had some questions about the numbers last year, there were eight positions that were authorized that were removed from it. But it was also when they came out, they said, if you remove these authorized positions that have never been staffed and haven't been hired for, then it was a threat that came with it. Then you were going to risk having services reduced and rates increased, was the actual threat that was with that. The 8 positions that came out, it turned out, I went back and I looked at the documentation, was actually from PD, which is already 11 people under. And I look at that and say, you have 11 people under, you wanted to add an additional 8 authorized positions versus trying to figure out what you do to both retain and recruit the number of people that you have. Then we had a $100,000 consulting report that said, our police are overworked, which they are, and they're understaffed, which they are. So the recommendation was to add an additional 8 new hires when there were already 11 hires not filled. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm having trouble understanding from an operational strategy perspective. Because what I would say is instead of saying, let's add 8 new positions we're not going to fill, what do we do from a budgetary perspective to make sure that we actually fill the existing 11 vacant ones? And we also make sure that we retain the staff that we have. And I think that's where we haven't been being allowed to have these conversations because there's been a bizarre focus on adding authorized positions. I'm telling you from an operational strategies
yeah,
perspective.
then I think council needs to hear that. Like, hey,
Yes.
what is the decision making on authorized positions, right? Maybe they're not getting the story, but
Exactly.
even that, before you even get to before you even get to the cost, it would have been, hey, what do we really need? Like if you were looking at an authorized position and telling city council, this is what strategically each individual needs to do, you don't necessarily even need to get to cost yet to figure out, like whether or not you need those individuals, right?
And we have not and historically had the chance to have that direct conversation with city council except through our council liaison. And we are giving her, and she knows all too well, we were asking her to carry some very specific messages back to the city council. Over the last year, we've had more face time with the city council as a commission.
Fair
And I
enough.
think that I think part of what you're hearing is, and I think part of that is a result of Commissioner Rossi pushing these questions. So I think this is gonna be our standard operating procedure as a commission for the foreseeable future, to have direct conversations with the city council. I also believe that the city manager was not representing us well either. So that's a whole nother conversation to be having.
That is all.
Tina, is there anything else that you intended to speak to us about? We have taken you down so many bunny trails.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that we need to hear from you, or that we should be hearing from you?
No, that's all.
Perfect.
Yep.
And I hope you hear that we appreciate you and the work that you're doing, and trying to understand and trying to give guidance to the city council, so they can in turn give guidance to you.
Understood.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. John, you're going to show us something. John, is what we're seeing projected to people outside of this room?
Yes,
Okay,
where
so,
it's set up so when I pull this up, it'll also be on.
so well,
It will be shortly,
Okay.
Chair.
So before we do that, I saw some rather sensitive human resource information
Yes,
on that report.
this is why I'm kind of a little bit.
Yeah,
with this.
I just need bottom line. I don't need to see
Just-
all of
just
the
show us the-
detail. You don't need to show us the
We
detail.
do
You
not
don't need to
need-
present it. I just need the number.
I do not need to know how much Officer XYZ makes. I do not need to know.
Okay,
We're asking for.
okay.
the
So,
bottom
but
number.
to do the delta, I won't be able to do the delta here on the fly.
Take,
I would take
take.
I won't be able to
I
show
think
you
this
the
is
differential
dangerous.
on the fly.
This is showing.
It's too,
The-
it's an involved
It-
calculation.
I would go ahead and X this out.
Take it
Sure.
down now, please.
Okay.
Because the HR person in me right now is going
Not
nuts.
the whole Zoom, just this, no,
So
no.
leave,
just the-
S1.
Whatever you're sharing,
That's fine.
John's computer, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then if somebody could take a screenshot of what we're seeing on Zoom.
Yes,
We
that
need,
one, that-
we need to take that down now, please. Oh my goodness, keep going, please.
These are just data. There's no personal information in here. So
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
other.
So, John, the
Mhm.
question was, is there a way you can scroll down to the bottom of your Excel spreadsheet and give us the bottom line number?
So really the bottom line number is rolling up into this schedule
And
here.
this is in our book. This is matter of public record. We're not looking at it.
So this is a different document. So this right here is something else. So I wasn't prepared to present this tonight.
Okay,
So so here, I'm just going to minimize this. So the bottom line as it stands right now, the personnel is basically on page 24 of your document, and that's the 27,396,000. So I have to do some back end
take me to
calculations.
page what, 24?
Yeah, on page 24, I'm sorry.
Thank you. This is where the numbering gets funky. Okay. Page 24. Top of the page, yes. Okay. So John, you can see our page 24 at the top of the page. You see proposed for 24-25. We have
Correct.
gone from an estimated 23-24 of 23.3 million,
Yes,
almost 23.4 million.
that is
And
correct.
we're jumping to 27.3 million, so a $4 million delta.
Yes.
So when I look at that, that's where my question comes.
So when you look at this, there's a couple different things when you're looking at this.
And that,
So-
and that
so-
4 million.
First, the adopted 23-24 was 26,659,000
Yes.
versus our proposed this year of 27,396.
Yeah.
So one of the fundamental differences that between those two numbers is more of the positions are fully funded between the 2 years.
So how many positions, that goes back to that question that I had from before you left. How many positions were prorated last year? And then what is the prorated number for this year? So that I can understand that that's the case. Right? So that's the devil's in the details sort of thing. It's like, how many positions are now fully funded?
or do you propose to have them fully funded?
And how many positions? So, and let's start back with how many positions were prorated from last year?
So, Commissioner Rossi, let me, restate your question and tell me if I've got it correct. If we're looking at what was adopted last year, it's 26,659,000.
Correct. How many, how many?
Yeah, how many positions are represented in that number?
Correct.
Perfect. And I'm assuming that's fully loaded. Yes?
Yes, that would, these
No.
numbers are fully loaded
Fully
numbers
loaded.
for each position that is budgeted.
Well,
Okay.
that would also, that should include some of the prorated as well, because I mean,
Very much,
prorated,
it very much
prorated has
includes
a
those.
tail to
Yes.
it, right?
It does,
Yes,
yeah.
it absolutely does.
So how many positions were fully, uh, fully baked in on that? How many, well, let's just make it easy. How many positions were prorated?
Right, right.
Right.
And so I'd have to go into that detailed schedule to
Okay.
really answer that,
So,
answer that
I mean,
question.
you can do that without
Could
us
we
looking at the screen.
estimate, like, if the 26.7 adopted last year, right, included prorated, I'll call it savings for now of
It was
1.67.
not 1.6, it was 1,067,000.
Million.
1,067,000.
So if we add that back on, would that be the fully funded? Can we say it's 27.7 million would have been the fully funded for 23, 24?
That would be an accurate statement.
So then it's really gone up. So it's 27.7 for fully funded 23, 24 versus 27.4 with a prorated 24 position.
No. The 24 is prorated positions is this year's prorated positions. We don't
Yeah,
know what.
Right,
That's what I'm
yeah,
saying, with
that's-
Right.
prorated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's not the,
Right.
that's what doesn't make sense to me. Do you understand?
No.
So,
I don't.
okay, so so this 27.4 million is also, there's an undisclosed number
Of proration.
Prorated.
of
Yes.
proration.
Right.
But
Yes.
but it's 24 positions that are prorated, right? The 26.65 million is an undisclosed number of positions that were prorated, but $1.67 million of proration. So I'm trying to understand, like, theoretically, if more of the positions are fully funded, then that number of prorated positions should be lower this year. And last year, they should have been higher. So we're talking,
So.
or
so
you're just
it's-
talking about more of the positions that it's a different space in the proration. I mean, like,
There
that's
could
the-
be, yeah, so the prorations, it's not just the number of prorations, it's,
Yeah.
you know,
It's
is the proration 11 out of 12
Sure.
versus 5 out of
Right.
12? for
Sure,
example.
Right.
but that's why I categorically disagree with this approach, because of the lack of clarity to the approach, because it really is looking kind of trend
Its
line to
judgment
understand.
is just basically a judgment or an assumption on when are you going to fill that position?
Right.
Right.
So,
with-
and
we're-
that's subjective.
We're not getting position controls with the estimations and having an understanding of it. So, I mean, right now, again, I mean, this should be a fairly simple question. What is the number that is prorated that you're saying is not included based off of your prorations? So that will clarify a lot for me, and maybe this discussion that we're having,
Mhm.
it will clear it for me up too. Because you could be 100% right, but without my having an understanding of what that dollar figure is, I don't know.
Right, right. The confidence level.
I mean,
Yeah.
because when you do assumptions,
Yeah.
you have variables in the assumptions, and you are very clear about what your variables are. This is what I'm assuming. I'm assuming 24 positions, and it will be, proration of this. And so what I'm struggling with is we don't get that. We get, well, it's maybe this, we didn't know how many positions were prorated last year. Right? We didn't know how many. So that has to be something
We know
that's,
the dollar.
I think.
well,
what
we
we're
didn't
saying
even,
is
we
we
didn't
need
even
to
know the
see
dollar.
reasonability of
We
the
didn't,
assumption.
we didn't even know the dollar amount last year. And
Well,
that's,
yeah,
that's the
that's-
problem is in the budget documents, if you want to create those assumptions, then you need to document those assumptions. And that's what hasn't been happening. And so then we've been doing runarounds on the questions to try to get the answer. But when I put together forecasts and projections, like, these are my assumptions, you can't walk through and
Yeah.
say, here are the numbers. I
I
do think,
totally
I do
agree.
complicated things in the background. Don't ask me what the basis of my assumptions
So
were.
what is our direction to John right now?
I think what we're
I just
What
thought
I'm
it was-
hearing, what we're looking for is really the assumptions, right? Tell us what you used as whatever your assumptions are for your proration in
Mhm.
terms of head count, right? In terms of when you were projecting for them to come in, month times, as well as I would think also position type, right? Because
Right.
depending on the position, that it obviously impacts the amount of salary as well too.
I can staying higher level. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, that's how I would
Right.
I agree
see
with
how
you.
you would be able to test the reasonability of it, right?
Right.
Because if you just have lump sum numbers, as you were talking about, it's like, well, how does that correlate to the head count versus this? Like,
Correct.
you'd actually have to see how you built out those assumptions.
So with that said, let me ask the commission this. Um, what is the preference in terms of timing? So I'm happy tomorrow to go through, put together some schedules, send out to everyone, say, okay, so here's all the prorated positions. As it stands right now, here's the personnel budget as it stands right now. Here's what it looks like if I fully fund everything, all positions. And here's the cost related to that, and then here's the delta between the two.
That would give us the number we want, but that still doesn't answer your question as to the how.
Onto the assumptions.
Yeah,
So with that, the only caveat there is, with the management services director, being sick right now, I don't, because I would have to work with him to see what his assumptions were, that whole thing, to document that and note that within the report. I'm happy to do so. I'm just concerned about whether I can do that tomorrow to turn that piece of information around quickly for you. That's my only concern.
I mean,
If I'm able to, I'm happy to do so.
that's a fair concern because we do want Lewis to be looking at whatever numbers you give us.
Yeah.
Okay. Without his review and blessing, I think it's going to be, not going to answer our question because we're just going to have other questions. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
no, I mean, I think that for me, the most important part is understanding the number of prorated positions
Mhm.
and the dollar amount that's prorated so
Right.
that it's clear to the council, this is what's not included in the budget.
Okay.
To some extent.
No, absolutely,
But
absolutely.
consistent information for last year and this year, right?
That would be helpful.
Yes.
That would be helpful. And John, proof positive, you're talking to an eighth grader here. If Tina got really, really lucky on August 1st and all of those prorated positions were suddenly filled,
Mhm.
we'd have a budget deficit, am I correct?
We would have to adjust the budget. There's no question about that. Yes.
Okay. So, John, again, I'm going to give you my eighth grade mentality here. And it may be generally accepted accounting principles. I don't know. Why aren't we just taking a look at 171 positions fully loaded and budgeting for 171? And then in mid-year, John comes back to us and says, surprise, we saved X number of dollars because these were unfilled positions.
It's a good question. And the reason for that is this. So I don't want to tie up money that I know I'm not going to spend because I could use that money elsewhere to provide governmental services. That's the fundamental reason.
Well, that was what I was just going to say. Or could you give us the report on, could Lewis, please speak for Lewis, Tina, if he write checks that he's going to cash now. Okay, could Lewis be looking at it on a monthly basis and say, here, I didn't fill these positions, so this money goes back. And every 30 days, he's doing this. Now the city council has an understanding of what they've approved vis-a-vis what it's keeping the city running. It just feels like it's an easier solution than having a complex, albeit I'm sure well thought out formulaic approach that you're taking. It just feels, and it also feels more integrity based. People cannot look at John saying John's doing what cup is the P under here? Okay,
Right.
we're shuffling the cups around. He's not doing that. Here's how much it would cost. And by the way, by the way, City Council, in your judgment, you say you approved 171 positions, assuming what all 171 were filled, this is what it's gonna cost us. So now city council becomes very, very cautious about every position they approve. So again,
Or project,
I'm not
or
creating a
project.
solution here, but what I am suggesting, I'm asking a heartfelt question. And oh, by the way, it's easier for me when I go to Pavilions next week and I see my neighbor there and they ask me, what is this unfunded? What is this prorated? What does it mean? How does it work?
Right,
I don't know.
right. So the best example that I would use to couch against that approach,
Against it, okay.
against that approach,
Okay.
is looking at the 23-24 fiscal year. We have $3.5 million of vacancy savings on top of the $1 million that we already estimated at the beginning of the year.
All right.
And again, from a finance director standpoint, I would not want to tie up $3.5 million that can be repurposed for other municipal services.
So, but Sean, that doesn't make sense. So, because you're not tying it up for other municipal services, you're actually, by this approach is what's actually tying it up for other municipal services, because you're saying we're going to be doing it in personnel versus coming back to the city council and asking for appropriations for the additional personnel that you need.
Yeah.
So you're actually, it's a backwards logic in that sense. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't mean it in a negative way, just
Yeah.
it's reverse, because you're saying we're going to put a budget in for X amount of personnel
Right.
and we're holding it firm.
Yeah.
That right there means you're holding it up away from it be able to use for other governmental services.
And John, the approach that the cons, or we're doing pros and cons, the pros for the approach of budgeting for a fully staffed organization
Mm-hmm.
is now the city council understands the gravity of what they've approved. The city manager is put in a position where he or she must manage to that number or lower it, create, come back to the city council and say, we said we needed 3 people, we only need 2. And it would cost, over the next 12 months, it would cause us all to look at our budget, our thinking in terms of personnel costs, which is 70% of our total budget. Again, maybe I'm being way too simplistic. I apologize. I did no research on this, but it just feels clearer, more manageable. And if the city council has been making mistakes for the last 5 or 6 or 7 years, approving increases as Ina has so ably documented for us. Now city council has got to look at it. So Mayor, I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the hot seat here. City council's got to look at it and say, we may have made a bad decision. And we may have to rethink that. So again, we're not going to solve it here. What I'm talking about is a philosophy on budgeting. And what I'm talking about is an entire chain where the metaphor that I'm thinking of is we're in a bathtub and we're trying to turn the aircraft carrier around. And it's going to take a whole lot more time than we have here in this moment. So having said all that, and I did exactly what I accuse you sometimes of
I
doing.
do it often.
I went down a bunny trail and I apologize, but John, we've got to be thinking about these things.
But, and it is a philosophical, I wanted to make clear, because it's the choice between holding on to authorized unfilled positions or making sure that our authorized filled positions remain filled.
Mhm.
Right.
And it costs more to recruit than it
Recruit, hire,
costs,
train.
Yeah.
recruit, hire, and
Exactly.
train
That's
than
what
it costs to
painfully finding.
retain.
Yeah.
At
And-
least 3 to 5 times the cost.
Right.
At least.
And what I've been saying all along too is I would much rather that we make sure that we have a sustainable level that we can maintain our staff than try to go aim for a level that then causes us to cut staff. Because that's, I
Yeah.
think, I don't like layoffs.
Right.
I would much rather say, what is a sustainable growth level? What is a sustainable staffing level that we can afford? And let's make sure we afford that versus, and this is where I have a problem with zero-based budgeting. Zero-based budgeting, you're supposed to be actually going through and saying, validating this is why I need every single thing. I felt like the way the zero-based budgeting was approached was the wish list of I want my, this is if I could have, and it was the way it was spoken about. If I could have the absolute best department, this is what I would have.
Right.
But that's a wish list item and it's
Yeah.
not a reality. Most of us live in old homes in South Pass, and I think we know that from just a remodeling standpoint, I wish a lot of things. But there are things that you have to like make sure that your foundation is solid first, and then you have to kind of build from there. And that's what I want to make sure that the foundation for our departments are solid first and foremost, and that retention is prioritized.
Sure.
So John, we haven't done what I suggested, and that was, give a fully funded number. So, you said you could do that.
I can do that. I can't do it on the fly. That's the only
You
problem.
can't do it on the fly. Fair enough. Fair enough. I would like, to be honest with you, since I'm never going to run for city council, I would like to use the 31st to address this in front of the entire city. We have 2 city council members here. I'd like to bring this up in front of the entire city council and suggest that this is something that they need to be looking at. That there are years and years and years of headcount additions
Yes.
that may not make sense if you think about it. And instead give Lewis the opportunity to say, of the 145 people we do have, what's it going to cost to retain them? What's it going to cost to properly train them? What's it going to cost to recruit the 5 or 6? Lewis sits down and says, here are the 5 or 6 critical positions that if we don't fill in the next 60 days, this city is going to be, there's going to be problems. There's going to be, we're going to be in a world of hurting.
Yes.
So let's take those dollars and let's figure out what those 5 or 6 positions are. And let's go out and be the best in the recruitment world to get those people.
Sure. So
Because
yeah,
I got to tell you, I look at how many consultants we use. That should be going to personnel costs. Okay, I was a consultant. I made my career being a consultant, and if people were smarter, they would have never needed me.
so one of the things that we have done, and it is within the personnel budget, is so because of the recruitment and retention problem, so we have some referred to as limited term employees. And so those limited term employees, they're backfilling for a vacant position,
Right.
and they are within the personnel budget.
Right.
And so those type of positions, some of them, not all of them, some of them are prorated, like maybe the limited term, but they're only going to be used for 6 months on there, but at limited term with full benefits, as opposed to a temp person, if you will, in contrast to that. The other thing I just want to point out, so I hear the commission and their view about, fully, so budget for all the authorized positions and
Right.
see what the dollar amount is. Totally understand that. The purpose in the approach that I've taken with the personnel budgeting is because it is incredibly hyper accurate in there. And so now, so we can go ahead and take the approach, because I understand it's like, okay, well, what is it really going to cost if we had all the staff
Right.
that are authorized? So I totally understand that. And then, and then take a different approach and say, okay, well, we know we're not going to fill X number of positions.
Right.
And so what we do is in accounting, they just refer to it as a contravaluation account, but it's an offset.
Right.
So say, for example, you're, in this example here, okay, if the $27.4 million, say if that was the fully funded, there would be an offsetting number right underneath it
Right.
to show the offset to that
The
cost
advance
and
to pay
savings.
Sure.
Yes, so we can always take that kind of an approach as well.
I think that will
So
inform the city
that's-
council differently.
Right. So, and I think that's the more appropriate approach to take, because I mean,
Okay.
regardless, you have to do the same math.
Yeah,
You have to
yeah,
do
you
the
do.
same,
You
like
do.
this is the FTEs. Now
Yeah.
this is, you could call it the savings, whatnot, but that way you.
It's the
you
same dollar
show-
amount.
Right.
Correct.
And that way you have the visibility of both. So I have not designed this budget to do that
We know that.
for this year, but I can put the structures in place to whoever succeeds me
But-
to do
but-
that
but-
going
But
forward.
John, I don't think we need the structures in place. I want this to be simplified.
Okay,
You know somewhere in your numbers what the fully loaded number is. You
Yeah.
couldn't have come up with the other numbers with a sophisticated approach without
Right.
knowing what the fully loaded is.
correct.
So I think that's all we're asking for. No
Okay.
designing structures. I'm going to cut your time, make it efficient.
Okay,
No designing structures. Just give us the fully loaded numbers so
okay,
that we can go that route. And that will help the council, evaluate the authorized positions as well.
absolutely,
And-
absolutely.
And just to
And-
be
and I'm-
clear, it's the numbers for this budget and last year.
Last
right?
year.
So
So
we
we
have
do a compare and
comparable.
contrast.
And one thing, look, it's been said, Mr. Betta has actually said it a number of times about the KPIs. We do need to get the KPIs in here because I think one of the issues that I'm seeing and is without true KPIs, we're getting this kind of nonsense happening. We've seen in nonprofits is a liking to say, I manage, a department of 173 personnel. Right,
Yeah,
or I
right,
have a
right.
department, or I manage this kind of budget, and it's a resume builder sort of thing versus saying, being actually evaluated based off of your ability to recruit and retain. And I think a HR director would make drastically different decisions on this if the question was, we're going to start actually evaluating your performance based off of your ability to have this rate for your retention, or
Mhm.
we're going to do it based off of this vacancy rate. If any HR director was evaluated based off of their vacancy rate and told, if it said, we want to see a vacancy rate no more than 12% or 9%, I'm telling you, those authorized positions would plummet. Right?
Yeah, right,
The
right.
authorized positions would plummet because they wouldn't want that. But this way you get to say, oh, yeah, I'm an HR director for a organization with 173 budgeted positions. Right?
Right, two different things.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
don't need that.
Yeah.
What we need is actually someone who's held a performance, because all of a sudden they start behaving very differently and they start saying, what do I need to do to recruit and retain? Are there things we need to be doing, not just from a financial standpoint, from a culture standpoint? Are there things we need to do because we have a retention issue right now?
Yeah.
Right? So those are the operational decisions I want to see addressed in the budgeting, and these kind of details help do that. Sorry,
So
I'll get a
ju-
soapbox.
that- Yes, and what you're talking about is the private sector versus the public sector. We're in the public sector. Well, adjusted based upon the public sector. So, John, let's go back. What I hear Commissioner Ho and Commissioner Rossi, they're in violent agreement right now. Last year and this year's top line number, if we were fully staffed.
What would it
fully
look
loaded,
like? Yeah.
okay, then, we've thrown so much nomenclature around now, I'm confused. What the adjustment, the prorated numbers are, okay?
Yes.
And then that will help us to understand where we're going. Now,
Okay.
when you have the chance to, email your successor, okay, please tell her that, Pete is not going to let go of this idea of budgeting the fully funded number with a number below, a prorated number below, so that everyone, it's public for everyone, and that we will also tell Lewis that, not to, go into convulsions. We're not going to put KPIs on him now, but we do believe KPIs are appropriate over the next couple of months, if not, by the end of next year, end of 25. Okay? Good. Thank you. We do want him to come back. Okay?
KPIs are supposed to be standard part of the budgeting process.
I believe.
Yeah, and there are actually KPIs that are actually out of the box, straight up for
You had this last week.
for the public sector. And I'm wondering, I mean, you could talk about how to implement the KPIs, but I think it is time to start to introduce them, especially we were supposed to start doing it in the ad hoc, and I know that we've had the delay in the ad hoc. But I'd like to at least give some sort of date that's not the end of 2025.
So-
So,
fair-
if I
fair
can
enough.
jump in here.
Yes.
Let's all keep in mind that the council agenda for Friday has been posted, and the council will be considering the approval of an interim city manager.
Yes.
Okay,
And if that city manager is approved, he will start on Monday.
Right.
So I think that will be a very good conversation to have with him.
Perfect. I also think
As
that
the
is.
interim, I said interim, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think this is something we should be asking LSL for. What are the appropriate like budgeting KPIs that we should be looking at?
Right.
Because what we got was a list of 75 or 80. Sue Lee brought us a list of 75 or 80 KPIs, and to me that was an unnecessary exercise. I want one sheet of paper. Tina did a really good job right here. She gave us one sheet of paper with a scorecard.
Yeah.
On a monthly basis.
Right.
Very easy to do.
Well, and they weren't KPIs. They were kind of check off list of like, yeah,
that is correct.
they weren't measurable. And I
Yeah.
think that you and Commissioner Quaid had worked on a set of KPIs
did.
as well. And yeah, and that was just for finance. Yes.
Yes, Sue Lee left before we could complete that
Okay. Yeah.
exercise.
Thank you.
Yes. So thank you, John.
I will make it a
what
point
we're
of,
asking for then, right?
yes. So I will make it a point tomorrow to get those schedules completed and out to you.
Please, if you need an extra day, take an extra. I'd rather have it correct than fast.
Right.
Okay. And but we do need it before the 31st.
Right. Yeah, you need to have enough time to digest it.
And
yeah.
we also need to put it in front of the city council.
Yeah.
And Councilwoman Braun has heard our conversation. She can give color commentary to her colleagues that aren't here, I'm sure. And if they care to review the tape, I'm sure that they're going to enjoy that. Okay. Anything else that we need around the personnel question?
I think we've covered that pretty thoroughly.
Yes, we have. Is there anything that we should be thinking about that we're not thinking of?
With respect to the positions, so one of the things I kind of thinking, something that kind of popped up when Vice Chair Rossi was talking about the vacancies is, having, so I have a position control report. And so one of the things I'm thinking of incorporating into that the commission may like is, so here's all these positions. So here's the 173 authorized positions. And so an indication which ones are currently filled, which ones are currently vacant, and even, right now as a whatever intermediary step, if you will, how they've been prorated in terms of the budget. Have they been budgeted? Are they unbudgeted? Are they fully budgeted? Are they partially budgeted in there? So that at least you have that snapshot.
Right. And John, would you also, can you give the date for how long this positions have been open? Because if I see a position that's been open for 12 months.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, as a business person, I'd look at that and say, if it's been open for 12 months and the building hasn't fallen down.
Yeah.
Do we need it?
Yeah. Right.
And if we need it, then is it properly, does Tina have the right job description? Does she have the right compensation level that she can recruit for it? So that'll help us. So if you can give us a date for the length of time that this position's been open, that'd be helpful.
I think that sounds like a KPI.
Well, that's what I was
Stop it.
thinking.
Stop it. You're right.
Well, and something else to that, so when we're talking about a lot of these positions and I'm just using the past year, 23, 24, there's, I'm trying to think of the right word for it. There's ebbs and flows with the vacancies
Sure.
during the year,
There is.
and so for example, when we budgeted for 23, 24, whatever the proration is on the positions, okay, here's what we think is going to happen here. But there's ebbs and flows in addition to that. So that's almost like, I'll put it this way, as a controllable in terms of when we think we're going to fill these positions. But then there are other positions that all of a sudden they pop up, that someone
Mhm.
moves to another city or they retire or whatever.
Absolutely.
And so we have that kind of movement
Right.
of the vacancies. So it's not necessarily going to be a linear kind of a
understand.
look,
I
if you
understand.
will.
But I think you could still come with the same approach, and what actually putting down the time from when the vacancy initiated, whether or not it was a
Right.
vacancy you planned for or not, is one, it gives you an understanding of what's happening in the market.
Yeah.
Right? It helps them understand, okay, what's happening, and is it, start asking questions, is it a market rate issue? Is it a market availability issue? So, because then it helps, again, make some strategic decisions about what's happening.
Right.
Or you say, okay, what else do we have? What are other ways we have to rethink how we're approaching
Right.
this? But you can't leave the same position open for 3 years
Well-
and say, well, we keep hoping.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure. No, it's a valid comment.
And-
Absolutely.
And honestly, would you please, and I'll have a conversation with Lewis when he gets back, but that would be a KPI for Lewis. He
Yeah.
would come back to us and tell us, is this just a matter of this is a marketplace issue? Is it a position description or position design issue? Is it a
Mhm.
compensation issue? Is it, has this position, sunset in every city in Southern California except South Pasadena? So I've been in businesses where every time a position is open, somebody leaves. The department head has to go back and evaluate that position and justify it again. That may be something we want to institute here at South Pasadena. So every time you lose a position, and by the way, that's also a motivator to keep your staff happy. If you have to reevaluate and re-justify that position, you're working a little bit harder. So there's all kinds of things we can do here. And that's a KPI. You're right. That's another KPI. I got it. See, Commissioner Rossi and I agree a whole lot more than we disagree. Okay. So at the end of the day, these are the kinds of things we're looking for in personnel.
Okay.
Anything else we may have missed, because this is item number 2 on our agenda, I'd like to declare it closed. Okay, unless commissioners, any other comments or request of John or Lewis or both? Okay, Sheila, I know you're sitting there taking copious notes. I'm watching you. You probably have a cramp in your hand by now. Is there anything clarity you need from us in order, in terms of our ask? You got it? Good. Okay. So I would propose a 5-minute stretch.
Chair, we actually have public comment on this item.
Okay. Why am I not surprised? Okay. And is there a hand on the screen?
No hands on the screen, but we do have one in person. Mr. Betta would like to make a comment on this
Okay.
item.
And then now Josh is standing between you and a bathroom break. So Josh, this is worse than standing between us and dinner. You know that, right? Okay. Perfect. Go ahead.
Minutes of your time. Take you back to something that was said here, third rail. John interpreted the Finance Commission's job again. You don't have purview, is what he said. In the weeds, it's your job. The Finance Commission is created by the City Council, not the staff. You answer to them. And it brings me back to the dead and buried Armine, which is we're only going to do what we want to do and make promises about what we'll bring back to you. We can't do this any longer. So why have the resolution of continuing appropriations if John has already decided that he's going to bring back the budget that he wants to the City Council? This is an amazing opportunity with the resolution to solve problems. And the City Council, Janet, expected these things to be done. Unless John is going to say, like Armine, that you didn't vote on it, so I'm not going to do it. This is the culture. This is what has to change. It's abuse of power for a staff member to tell you what your job is. So why have a meeting next Wednesday? Why? I handed a super secret note over there to the mayor. Why have a meeting next week if all these things are not known? And he's going to bring what he wants. Postpone it. Postpone it. You got 60 days. It's a sacred process, a great opportunity during the resolution period to solve problems. John's going to walk out. Maybe I can help you pack your bags, John. And nothing's going to be decided if he has his way. 3 months, no numbers, the same conversation, the same hour given to something, and you still don't have the numbers that you've been asking for 3 months. He doesn't want you to have them. He's super sophisticated and hyper accurate, but he doesn't know the number. 3 months of hearing that. There is only one standard: authorized positions. That is what the council votes on. That's the nut of the mortgage. If this city budget cannot afford all these authorized positions, especially since Armanet created all this damage with additional positions, they need to know that yesterday. Mr. Downs doesn't want to tell them. That's criminal. That's criminal. Please put an end to this. Thanks for your time. Ready for the bathroom?
I am.
Okay.
Meet you there. Okay, 5-minute stretch break. I understand that you all were going to spend some time explaining your expenses. You had come prepared to do that. And if, to be honest with you, there's not a lot of questions about your expenses. So my preferred way of handling that would be for you to tell us if there's anything extraordinary that we should be focusing our attention on, as opposed to going line by line with your expenses. I mean, if you truly want to take us through that process, we're open to it, but much rather have the summary. And if there's anything in particular that you want us to focus our attention on, or you want to bring to our attention, we'd rather you do it that way. Is that acceptable? That'll get you home in time for I guess a margarita. Yes. Or whatever your adult drink of choice. You're in uniform, so you can't. I got it. Okay, but my preference is not to go through not to put you through the that type of exam, but instead tell us what would you think we should be paying attention to. Make sense? Perfect. So John is at the Apple store buying a new laptop.
Sheila Pouch, Community Services Director / co-acting city manager for.
I don't think we're recording though. Esteban, we are recording. So you're getting my stand-up comedy routine on this too, right? Perfect.
So just to let you know what's coming up for 24-25 for our department, we are underway with the golf course comprehensive plan. So that is a capital item that we are moving forward with. We actually have a community meeting coming up on August 7th. We also are moving forward with Park Master Plan. We awarded a contract last week. So we will be moving forward with that. Those two documents that'll come to you, probably one in January and the other one it's about an 18-month process. We're hoping about 16, but that will really help guide the capital improvement list that Ted has created to add parks into that. Either it's irrigation, is it baseball fields, soccer fields, whatever it might be, to help that we haven't taken a look at all the parks and the playgrounds and the amenities on parks. So that will help that process. So we are underway with that process. We had an extraordinary summer this year. So we had our summer camp maxed out. We've had struggled for a few years after COVID, getting kids back. And I think parents are either back at work or sending their kids off so they can work from home quietly. So it's been a great summer, and we're hoping our after school will continue with a higher number than we did last year. We only had about 50 kids in the after school program, hoping to move that up to the 65, 75 we used to always have. It's a trying year for us because the school district has now contracted out their after school program, and so costs are about the same. So we'll see which families get in the program and which ones don't. And so we'll see, but we've offered a ton more classes this year. We're looking at more programming, using more of our buildings. So hopefully revenue will be creeping up. We had an extraordinary year for the golf course this year. I think it was 537,000 we brought in. So it was a great year. It was almost a COVID year, just 100,000 less. But so hoping with that golf course comprehensive plan, looking at the long range future of the golf course and the amenity down there, really looking to improve that. I know it takes funding, everything does, but hoping to move that forward to get a further revenue for the city. Batting cages opened. They are on a rent credit right now, so their rent is not there where we would be if we had a full rental. But things are moving along. Do you have a question? Your facial expression.
Oh, sorry about
That's
that.
okay.
Sorry, I just wanted to confirm, we are talking about community
Services, yes, we are.
Okay. I did have a question when you.
Sure.
answered.
Yeah, and so, I mean, and so the stables are going well. The stables every year has been increasing their revenue. More stalls rented, offering tons of classes, tons of summer camp programs.
So things are moving back up for our department in the way, especially after COVID moving back up. So we're looking forward to a really good year.
Sheila, Sheila, did the reaction to COVID, are you making any changes in how you plan or strategies you're putting in place? Because I don't believe that COVID's over. I think we're going to have another wave or two. So, I mean, are any changes happening in your world?
No, we are backed kind of to, I would say, prior COVID. We're not masking. Kids are still coming to, we kind of help follow the school guidelines. If the kids start masking, if that's a guideline, we'll start doing the same thing. But otherwise, we are back running. More people coming to our classes now and coming to our programs. Summer concerts are going well. So I think people are trying to put COVID behind them. But yes.
Yes, sorry, I thought the focus was on expenditures, right, this time around. So I was just looking at the general fund expenditure summary for community services.
Yes.
And so like rec and youth services have gone up, certainly from like at least on the last budget document, 627. I think some of what you described is more expected growth and activity. Is that correlating with what you'd expect?
That is, as well as a minimum wage did go up. When, so our rec leaders make about 19 an hour. So our revenues will increase to cover the cost of our staffing. But that's exactly it. Everything has gone up. I mean, to have a concert, we could spend 2,000. This year, we're spending 4,000, 5,000 a concert. So things have just increased immensely. And donations aren't coming in as they used to either.
Okay, thank you, Sheila.
Sheila, what was the final report out on the 4th of July celebration?
Oh, thank you. Yes, 4th of July was actually, we pegged it pretty good. We made $36,000 on ticket sales, which covered the cost of our $35,000 fireworks show. Maybe not all the other costs, but it did cover the cost of our fireworks show. So we were extremely happy. We had about 2,300 people compared to only 1,500 last year because we didn't have the baseball field. So it was a very well attended event, very well attended throughout the whole day. Thank you.
Commissioner, any questions?
Yeah. Yes, Sheila.
Yes.
It's not a question, it's a comment. Thank you for the concerts in the park and Shakespeare in the park.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, I live a block and a half away from the park, so.
So you got to enjoy them this weekend.
Yes.
Great.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I had just a quick couple questions. So on the transit planning, I noticed that what went from 2023 actuals was about 300,000. Now it's like 469,000. If I could just get some input onto the expenditures in that line item. And then it is transit planning.
Yeah, page,
Mhm.
yes. It's page 216 in your budget book if you have it.
Right.
So the increase between the years is this year we'll be buying our purchase of the two all electric vans
Okay.
were purchased. So we purchased those actually right around the first of the year. So that was $246,000. So that was a huge chunk of that. Normally it is a lower cost. This transit planning is mostly the Mission Meridian parking structure. The HOA for the Mission Meridian parking project, the city pays their portion, as well as our recreation transit. So the kids go on trips for excursions, as well as our seniors go on bus trips for the excursions. So this cost pays for that. That also pays a portion of my salary.
Now, should that be a capital project? Should that be considered capital and instead of operating?
Which one? I'm
Should that be
sorry.
a capital expense instead of an operating expense if you're purchasing the vehicle?
Well, it's a one-time cost that we have an automotive equipment,
Mhm.
but it's always come out of this because it's a different fund. It's a
Okay,
grant funded and not our,
okay,
that would be the only reason.
okay, thank
We
you.
don't put in our.
That is helpful. Let me look at my. Sorry. The range, no, you just explained that, that's it? No, I was just looking to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Ted, would you like to come up, Mr. Gerber?
Yeah, she's.
Good evening, Commissioners. With regard to the Public Works budget, we don't have too many notable changes for this year. We did some work in the past fiscal year reorganizing our budget. We are continuing our third year of negotiated contract fixed rates for urban forest and landscape maintenance. We did have to make some adjustments for energy costs going up, such as fuel and utilities. We have increased regulatory permit costs. We are showing our transportation division as its own, outside of engineering, as its own sort of function. We talked a lot about that during the capital improvement program discussions. We have some really minor changes, like showing some more detail in our parks maintenance budget. For example, we spend things on pest and rodent control and bee removal and things like that. So we're representing those as separate costs. You could see those. And then you'll see in our water budget that we've included some vehicle replacement costs, capital outlay costs for our aging fleet infrastructure. So we're replacing some of those vehicles. I'm happy to answer any specific questions you have about the budget.
Ted, it was a couple of meetings ago. I really have forgotten which one, but there was some conversation at that point about hiring a consultant to help you come in, and the number 312,000 that was burned into my psyche for that consultant was raised. I don't see that in any of the numbers here.
Sure. Because we had talked about, and the reason for that is many of those costs are going to be focused in the capital improvement project in the program itself.
Okay.
We do have professional services costs, upwards of $1 million across our operating budget. But about 70% of that is attributed to things that we are just routine static things like hydraulics studies and things like that don't relate to a particular project. The other 300,000 or so of that is somewhat free for general professional services. Half of that's dedicated to transportation, and the other half is our general fund professional services budget. So that's about $170,000. We did reduce that this year. We had $400,000 last year. The reason we reduced it was because a lot of that was attributed to the pavement management work that we did this past year, which we're complete with, and now we've presented a street improvement plan, and the Slow Streets program, which we're not going to implement any further in the residential sector of the city this coming fiscal year. So we reduce that budget, and you'll see those numbers have changed. But to your question, there is a good amount of professional services budget in the operating budget, but the program management component of it is represented in the capital budget. I believe we have what we need for us to get started for the council and the commission's direction. I really think we're going to have to see how it goes and adjust during the year once we bring on these new staff resources to see if it's working. And then we'll have to reconfigure that as we go. Absolutely. Thank you. That was clear.
So Ted, I think what the chair might be referring to, and I think I'm the one that keeps talking about the $312,000, is this council direction and I think and the commission to sort of create the CIP division that we talked about. And I know it's on the punch list. I think the punch list is proposed CIP division, general fund adjustment 0. And I think that when we talked a while ago, there was talk about hiring 2 consultants at $312K each, and then maybe a project manager. And I think what has how it evolved was that you think you can hire those people, but you can fund them out of sources other than the general fund.
Yeah, we'll probably have a little bit in the general fund, but mostly, we're gonna focus those resources on streets and water and sewer projects, which would make more sense to fund those out of those special revenue funds or enterprise funds.
Right. So when you say streets and then you add water sewer, I mean, I'm just, that water and sewer, do you mean the?
I mean, the water and sewer in the streets.
No, I
Yeah.
understand that, but I think the question is that we need to get the streets done. And as I kind of understand it, one of the reasons we've had trouble starting a big project like you've got this great plan now for the street improvement is that your staff gets so busy just with the daily maintenance and the potholes and the water main break and the just pumping water and the sewer, things that it's difficult. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that your staff has had a hard time focusing on new projects because you're so busy just dealing with the daily maintenance.
That's right. And so we will be hiring a program manager and at least one, probably 2 project managers. If the recommendation of the commission is that that's represented as staff, even though it's not, full-time city staff, it'd be contracted staff on our, say, org chart to make it clear that that's dedicated resources, we could do that. But as far as the budget goes, we've got that now built into the CIP.
And just to clarify, I think what he's saying when he says water and sewer is he's saying that staffing that comes to do the water project, the water infrastructure project will be paid out of the water
Yeah,
fund.
yeah.
And the sewer will be paid out of the.
Yeah, that's
sewer
correct.
fund.
I
So
should
that's
have
why it's not
clarified,
in
yeah.
the.
I'm
the
more
general fund.
concerned about operational and hours available
Right.
to work on things. So yeah, I get that. But
Sure. So we wouldn't, though, those folks ideally, and this is what, how we'll manage the team, will not be doing day-to-day operational work.
Okay.
They'll be focused on CIP, and to Vice Chair Rossi's point, they'll be funded from those enterprise funds from the capital projects already listed. And so they'll have to be working on those because that's what they're chartered for essentially.
So, and on those people, you intend to hire 2 consultants?
Probably, yes, probably 2 or 3 consultants. And it just depends on which firms they come from because
Okay.
we have to give them enough, we have to balance the amount of work that we give them so that they can step away from what other commitments they have to give us their, say, 50%, 75, 100% time.
Right. And I think we got to the 312,000 by 150 an hour times 20, 80 hours in a year.
Yeah, and that's actually on the lower side.
Okay.
If we're for a project manager, that would probably make sense. If we're looking at a program manager who's going to really help sort of keep track of these projects and the project controls, you're probably looking at closer to like 180 an hour, 185 an hour. So that puts you closer to like 380,000, something like that a year.
But but those people are in your plan, in your budget.
Yes, and we already got resumes in for some of those folks.
Okay, great.
So we're trying to sort out what that's going to look like, what projects they'll work on, and then we come to council with task orders to approve those contracts.
I think though, Councilmember Braun, you bring up a really good point, which is putting it somewhere, not necessarily putting it in the org chart, but an understanding of the consultants are part of the staffing or the contract services. That used to be, there's a snapshot, a consolidated snapshot that would say, this is how much we're spending on consultants a year or whatnot. And because I think one of the things is, there's this propensity to try to make staffing costs look lower by raising how many, not this case, sorry, just use an example, but increasing the number of consulting contracts there are and making sure that there's some way to evaluate, does it make sense to have all of these people in not necessarily this situation, but other situations, like what are the trade-offs between having it being contract position versus a full-time staff position? And are there, sometimes they'll like short-term trade-offs that have long-term consequences by going ahead and, contracting out where something would be better actually run in-house. But in this case, when it's something highly specialized, but it allows, yeah.
Yeah, and that's a very good point because, obviously a contracted staff is going to be more expensive um in the long term than than a full-time staff.
Right.
Um, however, the other side of that is specialized skill sets
Mhm.
and bringing them on board immediately, which is not something that's really easy to do with staff members. It'll take some time and, we'd have to get fairly, for lack of a better term, like lucky to find somebody with those skill sets
Right.
to bring them on as a staff member. And so I think based on the urgency that I'm hearing, that
Mhm.
this was the approach that we would take in the meantime to get a jump start on some of those projects, it may make sense in a long-term perspective to have those as staff resources. It just depends on how the commission and the council want to approach that.
Yes, yeah, so I'm not questioning, what you're thinking in that sense. I'm thinking more on a reporting standpoint for going forward, if not in this budget and future budgets, that we have the salary and wages, but also there's the consulting or contracting that's in lieu of salary and wages. Because it's hard for me to tell, like, when I look at contract services, what all that means. But it's almost like, yeah, like this is really our cost because some of it's contracted out and some of it's not. And in many cases, it's very appropriate, especially in highly technical areas, because they might also have access to systems that we don't have here. And yeah, so I totally get that. It's not a question about your judgment on this, but just how we report for it so that we keep it balanced. I have a question on the grants side. And I guess I'm not sure which department would be in charge of that, but I know Public Works has a lot of grant type situations. And I guess the question it's grants and contract management, right? Those are the two things of understanding like who's taking care of it, whether it's going out for grants or making sure that, we're going for reimbursements and following along with whatever we need from the grants. Because I know that there's some really big ticket grants coming out. There's a major transportation grant that has been recently announced. And there's also, I think, a major energy grant that's been announced. So wanting to make sure that we have somebody who's on the grant side. Go.
Yeah, that's a really critical resource. When I got here, our department didn't have any of those. We petitioned and the council and worked with the council to add 2 management analysts staff to our department to facilitate contracts, specifically contracts and grant management. In fact, the 2 staff we have, I essentially divide the tasks of grant administration and budget financial issues with one and somewhat contract administration with the other. I think, well, one, these are new staff. They're new in, not just new to the city, but new in their roles. So they're learning quite a bit. There's more work to do than they can currently handle as far as that administrative component and that tracking those revenue sources and grants, especially given that we're sort of reaching into the past and trying to collect some of these previous funds. Like we just got another 180,000 back on another former grant from about 5 years ago. Like yesterday, we got the check. So there's just a ton of volume of work for that administrative staff. I think, that might be a future area for expansion for us. I think we can handle some of these new grant programs. We're actively pursuing them, but for us to grow administratively, again, when we just got new staff in that are learning their role would be difficult. But I think that the amount of work there is underestimated. We in our past meetings, we tend to talk about engineers and project managers, but really the administrative component of all this work is quite a bit.
Yes, if you don't mind, Ted. So I was kind of going through the expenditure side. Obviously, it's a significant increase from what was considered the actuals as of June 27th, in terms of expenditures. So like 18.4 million, I think is what I see in total. So I just wanted to understand some of the increase, like certainly, I think what I heard before is a lot of the contracted type work. Most of it, you said, has been built into the CIP budget, right? As opposed to coming out of the general fund. Is that correct?
For the types of projects we're talking about, that's how we've handled it. We still have, quite a bit of professional services consultants in our operating budget and then a small part in our general fund budget.
Yeah, because I'm looking
you.
specifically at the general fund expenditures
course.
right now. And there is definitely like an increase in salaries in a number of areas, like for instance, the facilities maintenance, right? The sewer maintenance and all that. Is that
So for some time, we didn't have those staff. We actually got facilities staff just this year. Didn't have supervisors. We didn't have senior staff. They were vacant. So I don't know if I'm not exactly sure which page you're looking at, but that would explain a difference between last year's actuals in those areas and this year's estimated, just because
Yep.
the majority of that division was hired this past fiscal year.
125, and then there was like the details behind it for each area, right? So in that section of the binder. Okay, no, that makes sense. And then similarly, like for instance, in there's water production, there's like contract expenses, contract services, that goes, this is page 170. It went from like 500,000 to back to 1.1 million. So maybe again, filling in some of the work that wasn't done or.
Well, actually, our water treatment costs are escalating. Let me look at what page you're looking at. You're on
70. That's water production, is that right? Yeah, water production. So it went from like 2.7 million.
One hard thing about this time of year is that we haven't paid for our water yet. We pay for it in August. And so you could see, there will be another $1 million of expenditures before the end of the fiscal year just for water purchases alone for fiscal year 23-24 that you won't see. Well, is it here? Already here, water master charges. Yeah, I don't know that this 650, I have to look at this, but our charges are, you could see our actual for 22-23 was 560. Oh, you know what? I think it's a little bit less this year. I think we spent less on water. I can double check these numbers. So you're looking at 2.7 versus 5.4.
Yes, exactly. Then, even if I look to 22, 23, it was 2.8, right? And then 23, 24 was actually sitting at 2.7, although the adopted budget was 5.2. So it looks like, pretty dramatic jump in.
Okay, so let me walk you through this here. The most obvious one is at the bottom, our capital outlay. We had budgeted in 23-24 for a number of new vehicles. And we're not able to procure that because of a lack of staff in 23-24. We now have, as I mentioned, a management analyst that can help us procure those vehicles. So we have put that, $600,000 of automotive equipment back into the proposed budget for 24-25. With regard to water master charges, I thought we were looking at actuals. We're looking at estimates. So that was my confusion that we haven't paid that bill yet, but it's still accounted for in the estimates because we projected it forward. We over budget for water charges in the circumstance that we need to purchase more water than we pump. So our water expenses aren't linear. We have a certain price per unit of water up to a certain point, and then they increase substantially. So once we hit a certain limit, if we have to pump more water than that, we have to pay quite a bit of money. So we typically budget higher than we need. And then in some cases, when the price of water is amenable, we can buy water for a future year, essentially. So that's why you'll see a big difference in the water master charges of an adopted budget versus an estimated budget. You want there to be a differential there. We could budget lower, just like we've talked about in other cases where we're not spending the money. But in the case where we would have to make a decision to buy more water, to not have that budget is problematic. So that's one big difference. Contract services, they're going up. So you can see our actual expenses in 22-23 was around $200,000. We brought the Graves well back on we have two places where we pump water, one in San Gabriel, the Wilson Reservoir, and one in San Marino, the Graves Reservoir. The Graves Reservoir and well was offline for some time. We brought it back online in 2022, and we have substantial treatment costs at both of these facilities now. And this came up in our last council meeting at a tune of about $500,000 per site per year. So a good $1 million. And that's where you see that represented contract services. The estimation for 565, I think, is just basically because of the timing of the services. Sometimes we basically do two services per site per year. So if the second service falls just outside the fiscal year, you don't see it actually hit the budget in that fiscal year. So I think our estimation at 565 is why that is. But you can essentially consider this as $1 million a year for just the treatment contract services.
Okay.
Okay.
I think that probably explains a lot of it.
Yeah, those are the
Yeah.
big item. Yep. So if I can work backwards then to page 165. I think, oh, you know what? 165, I see the automotive equipment accounts for most of that difference of 820,000.
Yeah, and again, that's water, that's
Yeah, that's water
buying
distribution.
a few vehicles to replace aged vehicles.
So we keep working backwards to page 153. I think now we're on street maintenance. Do you mind just walking through the big variances? What is the special department expense? And then contract services.
Of course. So our street maintenance team has gone through quite a bit of operational change in terms of the staffing and what they're responsible for. What we're trying to focus in this new dynamic where we're trying to maintain the integrity of our streets and pave new streets as quickly as possible. We're trying to basically reprioritize what we use our in-house street maintenance staff for. And in my view, that is responding to immediate issues like potholes and breaks from utilities, issues that our staff, given their experience and their familiarity with the community, can address fast and not wait for a capital improvement program project. So I think you might see a little bit of flux in our street maintenance budget over the next couple of years as we sort of figure out the sweet spot about what's an appropriate thing for our in-house staff to take on versus something that we contract through a capital project. And so we're trying to bring these costs up to date as to what the kind of work that the street maintenance staff should be doing. We may be a little bit over in terms of special department expenses because this covers things like asphalt base, aggregate concrete, and things like that. It's probably going to be a little bit lower than this. This is sort of like what our current new staff are estimating as far as their production ability, but I think it's going to be a little bit less as far as special department expenses on our actual expenditures.
So I'm sorry, just to clarify then, that's like internal resource, but is it the cost of additional like materials and things, or is that internal times that you're accounting for in special departments?
It's materials. So we will group things generally in either contract services, we're pulling somebody in for labor, professional services for designs and architects and engineers. And then special department expenses is almost always goods like materials, or in some cases, some sort of special regulatory fee or something like that. But you could see on page 154, the breakdown of the special department expenses. We have 50,000, about halfway down the page, $50,000 for street signage, about 70,000 for asphalt, concrete, soil, and then $300 for the break room. But I think that depending on how much of this in-house work we do, which we're going to propose a KPI associated with that in-house work, these numbers may change. I would love them to be higher, but they'll probably be less based on the staff's ability to use concrete, asphalt, and, you know, signage and things like that.
Gotcha. Well, I think we're all for street maintenance work, so.
Yes, yeah. The question is, what's the most cost-effective way, whether you're doing it in-house versus through a CIP. The CIP, you're putting out a bid and you're getting the absolute lowest price you can get. Staff maintenance work comes at a premium price per unit, but it's something that you want to have because you want to respond immediately to an issue versus waiting, you know, 6-7 months for a contractor to address it.
Then, I'm sorry, did we cover page 135, facilities?
Sure. So I think your
That's
big,
the filling of positions, mostly salaries.
yeah, mostly salaries. You know, had a new electrician start this year, a new senior maintenance worker, a new supervisor. And we also tried to consolidate some of this staff responsibilities to make the team more redundant. We used to have a separate parks maintenance team, and a separate facilities maintenance team. We combined those teams under one group so that the staff members would be, the majority of staff members, a couple of them are focusing only on buildings, but the majority of staff members would be sort of cross-trained and a little more redundancy in the group. So yeah, you're seeing onboarding and you're seeing a little bit of a concentration of costs. As far as the operations and maintenance expenses go, there's not a whole lot of differences except for building maintenance you see go up. And that's really just a result of deferred issues with the buildings and us budgeting appropriately.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate you walking us through that.
Yeah, of course. Okay, thank you.
Hello, good evening, Commissioners. Chair Giuliani, Angelica Fraustolupo, Director of Community Development. For Community Development, just a few notable changes. Overall, there were significant reductions in the budget. I think we can all agree we were a little ambitious last year with our budget. We really thought that we were going to get through particularly some of the tenant protection programs that does remain in the budget for this year. There were 2 areas where there was a slight increase. We do have a new full-time community improvement coordinator that began with the city this year. So there's an increase in dues and membership for his association dues. There's also a slight increase in contract services, and that's for primarily the building contractor agreement that we have. We've seen that it's increased a bit. So community development this year is going to continue to focus on the implementation of the housing element. We do have also budgeted a bit for the ballot measure. We budgeted about 50,000. You'll see next week we are bringing a contract amendment to do more educational materials and outreach for the ballot measure. So that's one thing that is new this year, or in addition, we did have a budget item in this past year's budget. As I mentioned, we're focusing on the housing element implementation, and part of that is streamlining our process. That's one thing that we heard very loud and clear from HCD is what can we do to make it easier for applicants, both on the residential, property owner, single family owner, as well as developers. So part of that process is having a architect, city architect on call service, as well as GIS and mapping. We don't have anyone on staff with that technical expertise, and that's something that we really need in the department. And then we are looking at the cultural heritage ordinance and seeing again how we can continue to streamline that process for homeowners. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
So streamlining is something I'd really like to see. What would it take to go through and start looking through? I think permit requirements that we have on the books and ordinances that we have on the books that maybe are outdated or too much. Because I mean, I know that and to make them something where you don't have to come into the planning office to get a permit for it. I think at one point we had one for installing garbage disposal and changing out windows, even though they're the exact same window in place. And so we have a lot of excessive permits that aren't in line with the other cities. I guess going through and doing an audit of that and trying to reduce that for two reasons. One, to make it easier, streamlined for the community, but also efficiency for your own staff to not have to be reviewing, garbage disposal installations. So.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. And so we did have a department assessment done recently this past fiscal year. And part of that was looking at how can we make it easier for the applicant, for our residents. And in addition, just this past week, we also brought to the city council a resolution of intent to do zoning text amendments. And all of that is related to the streamlining. So where staff is going to be dedicated this year at really focusing on what can we do immediately to change the code, to change the zoning code, to make it easier. And these are exactly the kinds of things that we'll be looking at.
And then did we bring in a permitting software?
We do have that. So we are using it internally now, and we will be at the goal and as internally within the department, but as well as with the fire department and public works. We're now meeting regularly because the goal is to make it the public portal available January 1. So we are absolutely working towards that.
And would that allow for people to apply for some of these smaller sort of permits just through the portal and maybe submit a photo versus having to, a geolocated photo or whatnot, but so that it would be a little bit simpler than having to send staffing out, just being cognizant of staffing levels and challenges?
Yes, initially, as of January 1, what we want to make public and available is that we want an applicant to go online on the Excel program and see exactly the status of their application. So, and then they will be able to apply for permits through the portal, ideally pay for their permits, everything through this program. And that's going to be not just within community development, but also we're adding public works permits as well to the program.
Okay.
And just we were talking about just kind of making it easier and streamlining. But in addition to making it this program available to the applicants and the public portal, we also want to look at, what can we immediately issue at the counter? So again, just kind of like that streamlined process. So if someone comes in, rather than waiting, submitting an application to building and then waiting a couple of weeks for the review, what are the permits or the applications that we can immediately look at the counter and approve? Any other questions?
So I had one quick one on housing authority, and I'm sure this is a simple answer, but I noticed that the contract services went from like basically 5,000 to 140,000. Is that just a special thing that happens to happen with the contract authority, with housing authority this year? It was page 16.
Yeah, I see that there.
Page 187.
I do believe that was a mistake, and that should be on the finance list. There were a few minor mistakes within, and that was one of them.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So do you know, it just needs to be noted that it's a mistake? So it's page 187. It was contract services 8180. It went from 5,500 to 140,000.
Under contract services, we had, let me see if I can pull it up on my phone if I don't have it off the top of my head. Would you like me to grab my phone really quick, see if I can pull it up or?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I just didn't know if it was, so that there was a special contract, or if it's a mistake, maybe it was 14,000.
Is the housing authority, this is the house we own, but, and it's also in connection with the project at El Centro and Mound? Yeah, so I mean, I think that's right. That's the two things that include, that are in the housing authority,
Yes,
as I understand it.
And what I do know that we budgeted for is for like a financial feasibility for and financial analysis
Right.
for the El Centro and Mound site. And I don't know if you have, John, do you have?
So, I'm sorry, I kind of came into the middle of the conversation with this. So with contract services, in the narrative on page 188, there was just simply a transcription error there. It should be 140 instead of 240 on there for contract services, with the breakdown between the habitability inspection for 7,000, fair housing legal services for 100,000, pro forma analysis 25,000. So that's the composition of the 140 that is on schedule on page 187.
But I was looking at.
And thank you. So I apologize. So the
confused
mistake
where it's
was
at
a
then.
different amount. So the 140,
No, I know, but I was asked, so I was just asking why it went from 5,000 to 140 on one page, page 187.
Was the 5,000 last year?
Yes, so I guess it's here that it was, okay, so this is 240.
So I think we're adding, I mean, am I wrong about this? That the El Centro Mound project is now part of
Got it.
right? It's part of the housing authority now. And so that's a new project for this year.
Okay, so then just a note then for John that page 188 needs to be adjusted, right? Perfect, yes.
so, and I do have apologies, I do have the detail here. So it went, the increase is on legal services. So that's one of the tenant protection items. And last summer, when we had stakeholder meetings with the tenants, one of the things that we heard very loud and clear is that they would like legal services. So in the past, the city used to contract with the Housing Rights Center. The Housing Rights Center did not really provide legal advice and assistance. They did more general, they might have done a few workshops, maybe once or twice a year. They might have done other referrals, but didn't provide the legal assistance to tenants. And that was one of the things that we heard very loud from the tenants. And so we did include in here the budget for 100,000 for that service. Now, that's something that, of course, the council and the commission can discuss and
Yeah, that's interesting. So who would be providing those legal services?
so we received proposals from 3 different organizations.
Is that something we want to do? That you,
I think it's a I mean, I think it's actually, I think it's also a
Yeah.
cost issue too. So part of it is people who are specialized in dealing with housing issues, and tenant protection. So, um, I can also see the concern, given what we're looking at from a growth perspective on the development, because there might be some people who are being displaced and other challenges that are coming in. So it might be a little people who are specialized specifically in providing the lower cost services to individuals who are facing evictions and whatnot. Right? Am I correct?
Yeah, that's
Who are these tenants? Are they just general tenants of the city? Are they tenants of properties that the city owns?
It's the 50,
No.
it's the 53% of our population. So I
So
think
they're just
so
general,
they're the general tenants of the city
tenants of the city.
who are, who have
Okay.
advocated for some services that help and support them when they're dealing with different situations, I believe.
so I have a question because there's a lot of people who advocate for a lot of things from the city. Is part of our housing element, and is legal provision of legal services specifically a program element in our housing element or program? I don't know what we call it.
Yeah, no, not legal services, as I do not believe is spelled out that way. It was landlord tenant assistance. And the organizations, when we released an RFP to get information on what the cost would be and what kind of services would be provided, after having heard from the tenants, some organizations do provide this service at a, high cost. There is, of course, other organizations like the Housing Rights Center where the city has contracted with before. But again, what we had heard from tenants is that the service level that they received from the Housing Rights Center was not necessarily the service that they needed or was
That sounds,
helpful
it was
to-
not, it was that service they didn't feel was effective. So we're looking for something else. Okay.
I mean, I have a question, but I'm not sure which department it's for. It was actually related to utilities. It might have been Public Works, but I know our utilities costs are spread out across the different areas. Sometimes it's makes sense. I'm not like sometimes it's like, okay, it's for this facility or whatnot, but other times it's not clear if it's for a facility and we're not getting kind of consolidated numbers on the utilities. And that's one where, given fluctuations in the market and systems, I feel like we need a little bit more of a focused snapshot on utilities. Because I could see them increasing. And I know there's a difference between, maybe a difference between SoCal, Edison, and then the Clean Power Alliance. And there's something in lighting and landscape maintenance of like, were we ever going to look at that to see if that was something we could lower and reduce?
So the way it's presented is, it is across many different accounts. They're all 8140 designated accounts, but that does include all utilities, Southern California Gas, and then Southern California Edison and or Clean Power Alliance, depending on how the accounts are set up. We, because of the way, and this is not just specific to utilities, but it's kind of how the entire budget works, even like fuel expenses and things like that. We will pay in the aggregate, but we'll have to associate those expenses to different departments. So for example, we'll fill up a single fuel tank at the city hall here, but fire department, police department, public works will all use that fuel. So we do our best to divide up, attribute the costs correctly. And the same thing goes for some electricity accounts, SoCal gas accounts also, because much of the natural gas we buy is used to fuel our compressed natural gas vehicles. And so whether that's a community services vehicle or public works vehicle or, other, we have to basically split that up. So there is a lot of like metadata there. It's just not easily reported. Yeah.
While you're there, what's the status of the Athens contract?
Oh, so we, at about 6 weeks ago, we were down to about 10 issues that we had to negotiate with Athens. We're now down to two. We
Right.
we
That's
basically
coming-
gave them a new draft of the agreement with our suggested language yesterday. So
Okay.
we're really waiting to get those last two issues resolved before bringing it to council.
Thank you.
Of course. Sure. Okay.
Good evening, Commissioner Shannon Robledo, the Police Department. Um, to go over the budget, there's not too many notable changes. One of the major changes, obviously, is going to be the electrification of the patrol vehicles. We have 10 patrol vehicles and 10 admin vehicles. Another notable change is going to be the all city management contract. We added one more crossing guard to a location within the city, and the other one's going to be our flock cameras. The flock cameras, I believe we have 34 out there right now, and they're all grant funded by the UWASI grant. But those are the only notable changes that I have for the police department.
I think it was last week we talked about police grants.
Yes,
Yes, and there was a question about whether it was one grant or two grants.
And
Is
how
that-
much, yeah, because it was,
how much it
yeah, because it was the
yeah.
same number was in the revenues for both this year, the last year and this year.
Yes.
yes. So what that was is those were actually, we did some research on it. Was actually asset forfeiture. There were, I believe, 12 different asset forfeitures from
Mhm.
it
So
was
the-
an asset forfeiture. That was the funds.
Okay, so that needs to be changed in the revenues line probably, so it doesn't say grants.
Yeah.
It's a little bit
Correct.
confusing. And then the grants for the flock cameras, so the flock cameras is that for their ongoing subscription or was it for, is the leasing of a flock cameras?
We are going to put in for additional flock cameras.
Mhm.
They are a tool that just is invaluable to our city. In catching criminals. We are going to ask for more funds through UWASI,
Okay.
and however, we have to be approved for that.
How many do we have right now?
I believe 34.
34,
Yeah.
and then was there kind of data that was done before they were installed and then after they were installed and with the sense of what the effectiveness of them has been?
Yes, notably with stolen vehicles and just felony criminals that we are catching coming through the
Mhm.
city.
Okay,
We've also had murder suspects that have come through the city, and we were able to monitor them at certain times.
mm,
But just and anything from missing children to just missing elderly or what have you.
okay. And then do we have any like policies in place around the data and whatnot for the flock cameras?
There is policy in place, yes,
Okay.
and we can only use it during an investigative tool. We can't just punch up a license plate and say, "Hey, this car came through or didn't come through." We have to have a reason, just like the Department of Justice. When we run a license plate through the DMV or a want through the Department of Justice, there is a strict guideline, and it is audited.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
It's much more exciting on television.
Yes.
It is. Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions?
Oh, I do. It's on the expenditures, because we were talking a couple weeks ago about the need for the digital communications.
It's the $1.3 million radio tower that I don't know where that, I think it was Ted, it was in next year's capital budget. But did we put it in this year's budget?
We didn't put it in this year's budget. Something that we have to really look into because we weren't able to get the exact numbers on time to do it. But that's something that we would like to look to do in the future with the CIP program.
Does it put us at a disadvantage not to have it?
Yes, yes and no. Yes and no. Our city's kind of in a bowl area, and the rest of the San Gabriel Valley is kind of flat. And so some of the radio frequencies we're unable to get through a digital. It's very complicated, so I'll just simplify it. We're unable to get digital signal because of the location we are. And Sierra Madre also had a problem with this, which they're actually fixing. But in order for us to put an antenna, we would be able to share it with other agencies. Then we would be able to use their antennas as well.
Yeah, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, just in talking to Brian, is that there was a state law that was proposed about a year or two ago
That is correct.
that police departments were going to be required to go digital. So in that case, we would have had to buy the antenna because we only have analog right now.
That is correct.
And in fact, when we just spent $500,000 on the new radios, we actually had to buy radios that could do both analog and digital because we don't have the antenna. So I think from a sort of like a cooperative with other agencies, the benefits are like everybody, not everybody, but vast majority is using digital.
A majority, probably 90% of them are using
90%. So we're a little, so it handicaps us a bit.
So I guess the question is, given especially the timeline on the SLURF money, is there a reason to hold off till next year's budget for that? Or is there something?
I mean,
Or maybe at least could be brought forward mid-year and maybe give a goal to them, have them look at that so that we could do it at mid-year when we have better sense of the numbers.
yeah, I mean, I think to me, that's a priority, but I don't know what the council thinks, but it'd be nice to know what that, yeah, it'd be nice to have some numbers and some quotes and things like that. But you said you're working on that?
We're working on it. In additionally, we're looking at grants or congressional funding in order to obtain those antennas. It's just, we don't want to, we're looking around. We want to see what's out there.
Okay, great.
We appreciate your being fiscally conservative. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And fine, Sheila, yes.
So yes, we would only have finance left, library. Kathy is on vacation. The fire chief has already exited the building. And management service, obviously Luis is not here, but if you'd like to ask John questions.
Perfect. John. John, as I look at this, I see a significant decrease, almost 2.5, 2.6 million between what was projected or adopted last year and what is asked for this year. Can you walk me through your thinking there, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Hang on 1 second here. So which page are you looking?
I'm
referring
on
to?
page 77.
Okay. So one of the things that that occurred, yeah, in operations and maintenance has to do, so we had, of course, the large appropriation related to the JPIA retro thing in there. So that was kind of one of the things that impacted us quite a bit. So that was one of the areas there, and specifically, hang on one
John,
second
can I
here.
ask you like why that wasn't put into insurance? Like that wasn't.
So, well, it is insurance.
Yes.
So number one, and in the upper section there, when you're looking at this, that's just grouping everything, and then the lower section is breaking it out by the funding sources, if
Okay,
you
got
will.
it, got it.
So apologize for that on there. So let's see here. So give me 1 second here on the operations and maintenance. So overall, that was really kind of the driver with that. With that said, we can go into any of the, the divisions within the finance department, particularly probably, I would say the non-operating. And that is on page 81 for the division itself. And so a couple things to kind of point out here. So one of the things this year that's changed quite a bit under the special departmental expenditures, you'll see that we've gone from literally, a budget of the prior year of 9,600 up to 216,000. And that is broken down into several different things in here. And let's see, one second. That has to do with the way we're recording now the Caltrans fees related to our administrative costs on medical insurances on there that is relatively new for this year. So that's one of the major drivers. The other driver in here, and it's really the related to the insurance fund, and that's the liability and surety bonds, where you're really seeing that jump. And what that is so the insurance fund contains all the costs. And so the costs have gone up in the insurance fund. And so the allocation that's being charged over the general fund always hits the non-departmental expenditures within the finance department.
Hold on
Any
one
questions,
second.
commissioners?
I do. So on page 83, under the insurance fund, you are estimating that we'll have for claims and judgments for general liability stay about the same of what the estimate was for this year. So next year's projected. And I just wanted to know, like, is that consistent with actuarial reports? Because it seems
I
like
apologize.
it seems like general liability, the claims and judgments were going up and now they're going down.
Page 83, claims and judgment.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what's really going on there is really the allocation between the workers' comp and the general liability. So one of the things that when I'm looking at both of these numbers in total is I'm comparing them. So you know how we have the actuarial reports. And so one of the things that I'm always looking at with respect to this is that we are at a minimum equal to or in excess of what the actual liability is reporting for a 12-month period. So I don't know if you guys recall last year when we had the actuary here, they break things out between what they expect over a 12-month period and what they expect beyond 12-month period.
So I guess my question is, because I recall the claims judgments for workers' comp being consistently lower. And even, the adopted budget was, well, I don't know why it was so low last year, why the adopted budget was out of line. But if anything had happened on claims and judgments, you felt like, yeah, I think that it looks like that was just an under budgeting that occurred on 23-24.
Right. So
significantly off.
So the normally with this, the management services comes up with estimates for what they think the payouts are going to be for both general liability and workers' comp. And unfortunately, the management services director isn't here right now, but they come up with their claims and they report the numbers to me, and then I present them within the overall document here. What I can do though is I can go back and get the substantiation on how those numbers were derived.
No,
Specifically.
I'm looking, I don't think you need to do that.
Every-
I think that the adopted numbers for 23-24 were under budgeted.
Mhm.
And the estimates are more in line with what I'm seeing happen for the actuals and then your
Right.
proposed. So I'm not worried about you going back and doing that.
Yeah.
I will say on page 77, and I brought this to your attention before, fund, it's the 103-2501.
Oh, yes.
I'd
That-
like
that
to
will
make
be
sure that
corrected.
says insurance fund.
Yeah, and that has been noted.
Okay,
It's just, I just simply did not want to change the document from the 27th
Correct,
to
correct.
today. That's the only, but absolutely,
okay,
absolutely.
Yeah.
okay. That is fine.
And I apologize for that.
No problem. Oh, and yes, because this was your department was the one that the question was about, the controller. And so before you had deputy finance director / controller, but I heard at the last or 2 meetings ago that the finance manager position was now going to be the controller position.
Yeah, I heard that as well, but I went back and looked We did budget for that. It is budgeted. So in that report that I had up earlier, unfortunately, we have budgeted for it. We may have
For the
prorated
controller.
it. Yeah, for the controller.
Okay.
It may have been, we may have prorated that for like 10 months out of 12. I
Okay.
don't recall the specifics of it, but in fact, we did in fact budget for that.
Okay, just making sure, because controller for me is very important.
Oh, very much so.
Page 85, anything? Commissioners? '87, Hmm?
Sorry.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
That's it, yes. Public comment. Anybody, raise their hand on screen?
No one on screen, but we do have a one from Mr. Betta for this item.
Yes.
Positivity first without being toxic. Sheila Pouch, you survived 7 years and 2 really bad city managers, and you've been elevated to the right place at the end of your career. You rock. Thank you. There's a dead horse next to a stab on. Let me shoot it again. It's just sad. John Downs is not going to change anything substantively, and he wants to push you into a meeting where everybody gets confused next week. Just the way it's going to be. I like what I'm hearing from our department heads. They're getting their wings here very slowly because they're starting to tell you things in candor that are new. Starting to hear about what they really need. And I look forward to these conversations in the future. Ted's leading the way on this. But Ted, I want to check you on this purchasing department thing. This city, because it's become a contract city so much, is in desperate need of a general fund procurement department. It would change everything for all of you. We need also grants management because are so many grants and they're not even telling you how bad it is right now. It's bad. Let's put the money into these things. You know, if wine and pills were worth $100 bills, then we would make a trade-off, real trade-off in the general fund to what we really need right now in the form of these two services. $300,000 payoff to RMNA. Wow, and we're paying it out of an insurance fund. Yeah, how about that? Why don't we ask about leave payout that is given to all employees when they separate? Tell me where that's paid out of. I don't want the question to go over here because it'll take a half hour to give you examples in education, but that's general fund or the fund of origin for each one of these salaries. So let's stop fooling ourselves. We have a game system, a rigged system that's bringing back a budget without any changes. Going to put it in front of everybody on the 31st. Maybe we'll postpone that. I would sure hope. It's corruption. It's knowing the difference between right and wrong and choosing the wrong thing. The commission has done brilliant work with what you have in front of you, with what you've been able to extract. I don't mean to, there's nothing I have to say but praise for you. But where this goes, the council's going to get in a panic. And it's about John Downs in Armene in her grave saying that they provided a balanced budget to the city. But we all know this. There were tremendous problems on the revenue side and expenditure side. I'm just sorry you didn't get more from Mr. Downs in this process so that you really could contribute to a meaningful change during this period of continuing appropriations. Thank you for hearing me out.
Esteban, any hands raised on the screen?
No other hands raised on the screen.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Braun.
I just, again, want to thank this commission for all of your great work. and I now can't even remember. We talked about the fee schedule. And I'll look forward to our meeting on the 31st. Thank you.
Absolutely. Commissioner Hope,
Nothing further.
Cynthia?
Ditto Commissioner Ho.
Nothing further.
I would like to say that the meeting next week is going to be an interesting meeting. And we may find ourselves continuing these conversations. Okay? We may find ourselves in a position when we talk to city council indicating that there's still more work that needs to be done. So we need to be prepared for that. And we need to be prepared to meet in August if that's what's necessary in order to take a look at a revised budget. So be prepared, council, be prepared, city manager, for us to do just that. Okay. And Sheila, do you have any closing comments for us? I went a little bit out of order there. I apologize.
No, just thank you for this evening. Appreciate your time and listening to all the staff, the department heads. We appreciate that. And maybe on Wednesday, when we get together, we look at this budget and you make your recommendations. And if it has to come back, we need to make changes, we'll make changes and we'll come back at you again. So.
Terrific. Thank you very much. With that, I adjourn this meeting at 8:46.